All right, let's see if we can get this thing going. I do not want to spend all my day. Copy. We'll see. Now we have a great dissenting opinion from StockFather today. That he's very bearish. And I understand why, because I think when he looked at this, he says LSPY, and I said the same thing when we first looked at it, like it could be an LSPY. I'm going to continue to kind of just default to what I think is a pattern of, it's a distribution pattern, really, and it's an effort to get a second up thrust. So there's kind of a weird catch-22 and all the stuff we've been talking about, and that is that even though I've been kind of bullish about a potential run here, I'm actually bearish more like midterm, and then I'm really bullish long term. So it's like, it's a little confusing. Oh man, what's going on with this thing? I can't copy the link. Come on, you can do it. Come on, computer. I guess you could say that there's been like a kind of a back and forth nature to this range for a little while. And one of the things that I had talked about was the, see, I don't agree with him about volume. I don't know what he was looking at in that video, but I don't know. Like, he was basically saying like there's no volume on the bottoms. And that's true early on, that these sell-offs have like the highest volume, like these tops do. I totally 100% agree. Like high volume, high volume, high volume. Like those three peaks right here all have high volume tops. He called this a sign of weakness, that it broke down here and then immediately went low. I don't disagree with that, because we talked about that early on and we weren't sure if that was a sign of weakness or not. And one of the things I had kind of mentioned was that the overall move here, this was one of those things that just kind of like was there from the beginning, that there was this possibility that this was setting up for like a longer term, maybe sell down opportunity or whatever. A lot of times that early move is an indicative kind of nature to it. It could present you with direction here and there. The problem with this is just very simple for me, is that we've had times on AMC where after the initial push down, there's a moment of a bounce and then a drop. And I don't normally count that as part of the range. So like, for me, it's a little confusing, because what he's saying is that that's like this. And he's not wrong. Like, it could totally be the case where this is a situation where you're like, yeah, you're already kind of aiming low. And this is what happened back here. It was like, it had that initial push down, what we would call like an LSPY. And I was like, yeah, this looks bearish to me back in March. And there's certainly elements. I think someone in the, who was in the Discord group, I want to give them credit, because I think that they had kind of gotten like, you know, anytime people post bearish stuff, people get a little bit like uneasy, and they're like, oh, it can't be like that. It can't be like that. And, you know, it's not true, because there's been times where it's set up really bullish, or it looked really bullish for a minute, and then it flips. and it ends up being really bearish. And one of those times that we wrote, I mean, frankly, a lot of people got screwed, was back in the, I guess it was the breakdown that happened. I'm kind of looking through, I'm trying to see my my chart here. It was the breakdown that happened back here before the split, because when that Judge Zern decision happened, and there was a few things that happened before that, this bottom actually was pretty bullish looking, and it rightfully so turned bullish, right? And when we see stuff like this, it's easy to say this looks a lot like maybe the bottom we experienced in May or April, and then this looks like a giant sell-off where they brought it up to sell it back down, and then the rest of this is just kind of like pushing it up for distribution. I find it to be a bit of a mischaracterization, perhaps, to some degree, of like what a distribution could look like longer term, because while it's true that that's a possibility for sure, that it just kind of doesn't go. Like there's no need to go up any higher, so they only bring it back up, you know, maybe to 5 at most, and then they sell it back down. That was kind of always in the back of my head, like if you're going to distribute, you do it at like 505 or 6, maybe 480s, you know. That was kind of another mid zone for us, like 485. Anyways, I think it was like Spliffs or something his name was in the Discord group. He talked about, I didn't think it was going to come back above 480. And he felt like it looked pretty bearish because of RSI. And I went through and I looked at RSI, and I think that it's important to note, and I'm going to relabel this video, because if it was I'm going to say a bearish outlook, because I think it's important to mark these videos down, because sometimes I know that people don't always read the titles anyways, and if they're not going to come back and watch the stream, they're not going to come back and watch the stream. But for my own like continuity, I need to be able to like look back and say, hey, there was a sort of a time that we looked at this, and this is what we talked about. I have talked a bit about it, you know. I think there's a lot of questions maybe about what would happen if it broke down, like what would that look like. Frankly, like this motion right here, it would be sort of like an inverted move where you would just basically pump up and then just dump right back through the creek. So if it pumps up on earnings and it goes right back up, let's say it goes up to like 499, and then it comes right back down and it crashes through, you know, this creek down to 450s, yeah, like there's totally a chance that's a distributive action, because you've basically, especially if it does it like on an open and close, you know, you can't have this like big pumping up thrust that then drops back through support. So like there's nothing new under the sun, right? If you see something like that, that's probably what's going on, right? So if it jumps up here and drives the price back down, and it closed like really low, and then it starts breaking down even Monday going low, I don't think that's worth even questioning at this point. I think you probably just assume that it's bearish and you're out of long-term stuff, bull-wise, if you're doing options. It wouldn't make any sense to kind of sit there and try to play the game of the guessing game of like wondering whether it's going to come back up. That's not likely going to happen. So like there will be a definitive direction, I believe, after earnings and elections here. Elections is a bit of a tricky one, though, because last year I think it took almost 4 days after elections to find the results. So it just depends. Last time was also COVID, so there's that. There was way more mail-in voters last time. So then there was all these problems. And then, so like a lot of places have actually made it, it's kind of a mixed bag. I was reading about it yesterday, just a little article about it. And essentially, there's like 4 or 5 states that kind of made it harder to vote. And it may take longer because they're doing like more checks or something also. And then there's some states that made it easier to vote. So it's like a bit of a mixed bag there. But I think the general consensus is it's probably not going to take as long as last time because of COVID. The mail-in stuff really kind of delays everything. So anyways, so yeah, there's a couple issues, right, that I think StockFather hit the nail on the head with. One was this early drop, and I agree, like there was a simple kind of a distribution here, and then it dropped low again. I have questions about that because I also wonder, to some degree, like what is considered a sign of weakness versus just like a continuation on that sell-off. I think that most people, when they look at that, if you drew the trend down, it definitely broke out of the trend. So you're like, is it already forming a range? And then if so, this is a sign of weakness. It's like an early drop right after the auto reaction here. I don't know. Maybe that's a way to describe it. I've looked at this before and felt like that was probably all part of the same downward motion. So just to like contrast those two opinions, right? Like on the one hand, you could look at what happened back here in January, and you could say this is an auto reaction followed by a sign of weakness, and then it was just taken up in order to distribute long time and then drop. And then you would look at this and say it's the same thing. This was taken up, so this is an auto reaction here, sign of weakness, and then it was just taken up to sell, right, until you get to here, and then there's just like a last minute LSPY. So we would be like in this kind of a mode right here where we might make an upthrust, right by around March 28th. We might make an upthrust and then just drop, which is what happened back here. Granted, you do it on a larger scale, so you probably come up above 470 or something, maybe up to 480s. And that's where I think that I do agree with, I think it was like Spliffs or something. I can't remember the guy's name. The Discord, it's hard to say, in our Discord group, because he was saying it will look kind of weak to me. I don't know if it gets above 480 again. I think I agree. Like that to me makes sense. I see it as a range here between like 480. And I talked about this maybe a week ago or more. I mean, we went through this a little bit and we talked about what it would look like if it distributed. This one has been on the chart for as long as that talk that we had. So we were like, this is maybe what it would look like if it broke down. Certainly, going into the end of the week, it could look a little different. I don't know if it would hang on this strongly because with earnings and elections like being kind of at the same exact time, I don't know if it's going to be that passive. It may be very, very like volatile, meaning this goes very, very fast. So I've got it kind of drawn out long, like, oh, it'd take a week to break down. Like, well, no, it could be very, very fast. Okay. But on the other hand, when I looked at these setups, and we did look at them quite carefully, what we did find was that there was a continuity in the breakdown distance here, like after it makes that drop. There's certainly something to be said about this move as a possible sign of weakness. But then we have this issue of like, there's so much similarity in what happens here, right? Except that maybe you don't go super high, but there is a lot of continuity in what happens here, which is very similar. And I think this is where things get kind of tricky because from a Wyckoff standpoint, I personally feel, and this is maybe something StockFather might disagree with, that you can debate it because to me, this is very, very, very similar. In terms of like how we've had these like catches that then drop lower, catches that drop lower, and they don't always result in the same thing. And so I find it to be a bit difficult to judge because I want there to be a simple, reasonable, like this is the answer kind of thing. And I do believe that to some degree he's right. Like if this is going to distribute, it would look like it would happen right here. Like no brainer, right? You just pop up and then drop back down and then you could sell through. And we had called this a potential LSPY before, so it's nothing new if you've been on here more or less constantly. But there's a lot of similarity to what happened back in April as well. And I think that volume-wise, there's a debate you could have. If you went back and looked at this region, this is one of those places that, I was maybe more right than I usually am in some ways in terms of like the setup. But this was one that had that build out, that built out pretty healthy, and you don't really have a lot with volume here. I mean, if we're just talking about bottoms being bought up, then this doesn't look bullish, you know? If you're just talking about, and that's what he says in the video, is like, well, look at the volume. Where's the volume? Well, where's the volume in this one? I mean, the volume's like pretty high, you know? It's in these like drops and stuff and these peaks. It doesn't really seem to be in the bottom either, except for maybe in this very first buy-in way back here. You know, in these first couple buy-ins, there's a lot of volume, and then after that, the volume's just kind of dead. It's not the best indicator, and I don't think that it makes sense to look at volume and say like it's necessarily super bearish. And this is where I'm kind of gonna not completely debate it, but I just want to make it clear like that you can have different opinions than other people, and you still have a high amount of respect for them. I think that his opinion is as valid, if not more valid than mine in some ways. So like, this is not me like tearing it apart or anything. It's just observation on my part. But like, I don't necessarily agree with the idea that there's no volume in these bottoms. Like, he's talking about this drop having no volume, this drop having the higher volume on this peak. He's right, but there is a buy-in, you know, and there's a push up here, and it's brought up on little less effort than the sell-off. And then back here, I don't know where he's talking about there not being volume back here. To me, like, the volume is all in the bottom in this area. It's not in the peak volume, but it's definitely like in this buy-in. And I think the same thing applied here as well. Like, there's a lot of volume in these like push-ups gently. If you kind of take it out, zoom out a bit, I'm on the 30-minute. These would be like combined, right? But you'd see a lot of volume right here, but not in the very bottom. So I'm a little confused where he's saying like there's no volume in the bottom. I'm like, I don't really understand that, because the volume is here. It's not directly in the bottom. And then you really don't see that volume pick up very much. I mean, there's a kind of a both here. There's like a quadruple flush at the top, right? It's hard to tell, but just zooming out, I mean, kind of like doesn't really look like the volume's coming off the bottoms very much. And if you look at like this bottom and this bottom, this one has the highest amount. But this one right here, I'm saying bottom a lot. I know some of you guys aren't listening, or you're just listening. You're probably wondering what I'm talking about. I'm looking at all of the bottoms that happened in May versus the tops. It just seems to me like the operator did a really good job of disguising volume. Like, I'm a pretty visual person, so it's, for me, it's not as much of a question about technical, I guess. It's more like, how do you interpret this as a volume bar? Well, it was a dropping volume bar. Okay, but is it high volume because it hit a bottom? Or is it high volume because it came off a top? Or is it just both? I mean, so there's a debate that could happen. Oh, the volume's all on the peak right here on May 3rd. But then it's also a decent amount of volume in that bottom on May 6th. So it's like, how do you interpret like moves like that, right? They're just, it seemed like they're intentionally kind of driving the narrative that you can't really maybe use the volume in some ways back in this range. And again, I'm not gonna like, I don't want to pick on anybody or anything, but like, he did not think that this was, at least he didn't say like outright that this was bullish back here. I was like super bullish, and I messaged him and I wanted his opinion about it. He just said he didn't see an LPS, meaning like a push up here. So he was like, well, we don't see that. Basically, he was saying we don't see the creek jump. Like, you don't see a rebound here. And he's right. But I looked at this, and what I had saw in it was that the model here was that we're not spending that much time down low. And that was kind of what drove most of my opinion that this was actually bullish. Not the volume, because really, again, it's a hard argument to make that the volume is all in the bottoms here. You know, there's a decent amount of stopping buying around $3, and that's kind of the only place I can really see a lot of volume pick up. But then there's plenty of volume in these tops. There's a ton of volume in this top right here. It's a huge amount going into earnings, which was basically like the peak of this wave. And and then we drove low, and it's not until sort of this last minute, what looks like almost distribution, it looks like it at first, and it's not. It's definitely like a little accumulation range. You can see like the auto reaction, the phase B top, and then it goes down low for a spring. But it also, in doing that, had pushed over. You see, it had like pushed over and attempted to push that resistance. Again, where's the peak volume here back on May 10th? The peak volume is kind of on that push of resistance, ramps up into that top, and then it drops. So I think there's a difficulty that I'm having with maybe the idea that this is all the volume here is in the tops. Like, I just don't generally agree with that. Do I think there's a heavier amount of volume here than there is over here? Yes. So, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, that's true. I also think that there's and I've said this before, there's definitely always a yin to the yang in the sense of the market. So you always have a bear case and a bull case. And to his credit, that issue, that push up that we had in July on like the 23rd, that to me was a big distributive signal. And I had said that at the time, like, it didn't look good. I didn't like that it pushed up. I got really excited when it happened. If you guys were on live, I was like, what? We're going. And then it just stopped. And as soon as it came back down below that creek, I was like, this is not good. I remember thinking it had to hold way back here at like 520, and it didn't. And then 520 has since become like a contention zone, 505 to 520. And we've done nothing but kind of stay kind of smushed beneath it, and then had these little tiny up thrusts, to help drop the price back low. What I saw, though, in this area largely was seller exhaustion, because we talked about the patterning and how while they were making gains on this directionally, bringing it low, and again, maybe if this is an LSPY, it's just a channeled kind of a pattern where you're going like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're gonna have a 5. That's certainly possible, right? But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, like there's parts of me that agree completely with StockFather, because I'm like, yeah, I get it. The volume isn't exactly high on any of these bottoms in some ways, but at the same time, I feel like we're spending a lot of time in these tops, and to me, that doesn't really reek of distribution, not as much as it does accumulation. So he's arguing about volume, and he's somewhat right in the beginning, because he's saying that he is right in the beginning, because he's saying, well, the volume's in the tops. It is, but we're also not, and we're not getting huge buy-in volume on the bottom. We're also not spending a lot of time low. So we're continually bringing it back up. And the argument maybe that he's saying is that we're kind of like, oh, sign of weakness, we're bringing it up, we're bringing it up, we're bringing it up, we're bringing it up. We're just keep bringing it up to sell, 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 sell. I think the counter argument to that is that you're doing that to bring in sellers to try to take it down and get to those low prices to trade that low area, right? And that it really, if you look at it, whether or not he's 100% right about the buy-ins, I think what he's saying is like, this looks like maybe short covering, right? Shorts covering, shorts covering, shorts covering. He's not wrong. Remember that Vanguard had like 480,000 shorts position. And then by the time between May 29th and like it was somewhere around August, we looked at it and they had dropped over 100,000 of that short position. Now, that's in contrast to the somewhat 30-odd million shares or whatever that they own across different portfolios. Now, does it make sense for them to start selling off all of those all at once or in moderation and drive the price down? Maybe, because on the big picture, and we've mentioned this plenty of times on this channel, guys, because I'm all about coming down back here again. I've been about it for a while. And to some people's dismay, right? Like going between $2 and $3 again makes sense. That sounds confusing because you're like, well, are you bullish or are you bearish? You're just flip-flopping, man. It's all about time frame. It's all about space, right? It's all about what you look at on the big picture versus the small picture. It's irresponsible for someone to say that so-and-so, I hear this a lot, by the way, so-and-so is bearish or so-and-so is bullish. Like, don't just say that. Say it in terms of time. It's bearish short term, bearish long term, bearish bullish short term, bullish long term. Because you can be very bullish short term and still be a little bit bearish longer term, and then still be bullish on the bigger term, you know, like back and forth, right? So like, it's not really fair or adequate to say that I'm a bear, right? Because I think it goes down to 2 or 3. Like, okay, so I think it's going to go down to 2 or 3, and I've said that for a long time. I said that back in like January. I said I thought it would go up to like 14s and then come back down to like 2 or 3. Now, maybe that's already happened. Maybe we don't need to go back up again. My argument this whole time, and I want to make it really clear, has not been an argument on the bull side. Now, some of you guys are like, what? Are you saying you've been bearish this whole time? Going into the end of the year, I have to say that I'm a little bit more bearish than bullish, because even though I'm saying that I think it goes up to 869, and that's what I think happens, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, right? But if I think it goes up to 869, I think there's a good reason to take it up, to do another big sell-off. I think it could be very like important, in my opinion, to drive the price back up. The whole reason for that has been to drive the price back down. So if you've been following me consistently, you know that. If you're somebody that's been like, I've jumped in for a minute, I listen to you for 5 minutes, and then I get off, those folks like have no idea. You know, they'll still hear like one thing, and they'll say, oh, he's bearish. Like, they'll get on the stream and they'll hear me say 2s and 3s, and they'll say, oh, so he thinks it's going down. Well, yeah, but not before I think it goes up. That's my opinion. What if you're wrong? What if it just goes down? Well, then it goes down. You know, I'm not going to trade for you. You got to trade. You got to know what that's going to look like. And we've already talked about it a few different times, but it's essentially like an upthrust here. Like, it has to do an upthrust, in my opinion, to 480 to 5 at least. I think that makes the most sense to me if it's going to distribute. You go up first. Maybe it goes to 6 even. You know, I think you're going to get a big one. I really do. It almost makes no sense because we haven't come back up to those levels yet. Like, especially on this guy, we haven't done any kind of a back test here. It just dropped through it. It kind of went back up, but it didn't quite check that up. It's way up there at like 515. And I just don't see why we would leave it. If we're a bear, I don't see why we would leave it. So even in the midst of this kind of shorter term, even if I'm bearish and I think it's going to go down like within the next week, I still think it goes up to the 5s first. That's my opinion, but that's what I'm seeing. That's what I would say. Okay. And then on the larger term, that's not really what I've been talking about, right? Like, I've been looking at a lot of build outs, and you might say, well, yeah, but they haven't worked. No, not yet. But I believe very strongly in what I've talked about as like a slingshot model for AMC. And one of the things that I also want to bring to your attention is that if we were to look at, we were talking about this one quite a bit recently, and I think it's important, again, to kind of put things into perspective, because I had mentioned that while I don't necessarily think that it's going to be 1-to-1 when it comes to the end of this, there were so many similarities to what happened back in March that I just love it as a comparison model. Because as a comparison, it works really, really well. And one of the things that's very interesting about what happened back here, okay, is that if you look at the volume on this range, and I'm going to do my best to kind of split this because I know it's a little bit favoring the one side on my chart, but I'm going to look at January to March of 2022. It's important to note that if we're looking at this and qualifying it much the same, we probably would say, I would argue, that this is very much the same kind of sign of weakness right here. And yet, at the end of this range, there's a massive break back to the upside before a huge distribution back down. Now, the question here is, has this already happened, almost like in reverse? And this is another point that kind of bugs me, is like, I've heard some people say that this is like a huge buy-in. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I do think a lot of the filings indicate on May 14th and 15th of this year that there was a lot of people that bought in through the ETFs and stuff and through their, like, you know, mutual funds and junk. And there's a lot of people that think this has potential for upside, right? We can go look at them again today if you want. We should probably do that anyways, see what's been changed. But ultimately, like, the same kind of thing probably happened here as well. And if you just use that, you wouldn't have been able to tell, like, oh, that somebody was selling off. It's quite different, though, if you look at something back here, like the MACD indicator versus the MACD indicator here on, like, a similar time frame. So, like, for example, I think it was on the daily when we looked at this. You might think I'm a little all over the place today, but what I want to get across is that I don't think it's perfectly analogous to a distribution, but at the same time, I think there's an element here of, hang on. Is this it? I guess I don't have it on here. I don't know why I don't have, see, you just bias, Booksy. So what in the world is this middle one? I can't remember what this is, why I have this. Let's just get rid of it. So it's kind of interesting looking back at some of these things. So like here you have like a 2-hour MACD is kind of like coming down before this big breakout and it like depresses. We'll do it on the 2-hour and then we'll do it on the daily. I might have to get rid of some of this extra junk on my chart so it doesn't look so messy. Guys, like, each chart's like super messy. Look, see. Yeah, we have a similar thing here. You see where the price is being driven down low. This is on the daily chart, right? And then it's kind of getting this buy-in, right? This kind of upward pressure. Now, does it look like it could top off and not break out? Sure. But at this time, you know, there's a lot of similarity. I mean, and this is a 2-hour versus a daily. But another thing I want to point out is that, like, when you go and look at the daily back here, it's really different because this is a very short time frame compared to this. So, like, it's appropriate to kind of expand the time frame a little bit more when looking at that comparison, because it's like volume over time, like buy-in price over time, variable would be different. You guys are like, what? Some of you. What I mean is that if you're doing a comparison, I don't find it to be very genuine if it's daily and daily, but the first one is only like a month and the second one is like 6 months. Well, that doesn't really give you a true picture of the comparison, right? Like, proportions are wrong. Proportionally, that makes no sense, you know. Maybe it was like the weekly or something. Maybe that was the other one. Because I know there was one here that looked drastically different. Yeah, so on the daily, see how different they look. See, there's almost no comparison on the daily. You're like, yeah, I don't see it at all. Because on the daily, like, this doesn't have any kind of, it's just all up, right? It looks like it's all like pushing up. There's a big reaction going on. On our daily, like, it's all pushing up back to here. The big reaction happens. This looks like it's distributing, right? Distributing. And if that were the case, then you might say, well, maybe we're just going to, like, kind of chop up, you know, this away for a little bit. Well, that's kind of what I'm saying, you know? Like, I don't like to use the ideas of the cat ears, like, overuse them. But in some ways, that's kind of what I'm saying here at the same time. Like, so on the daily, it's like, yeah, this just chopped up until it broke out. And then when it broke out, it went, like in this August move, it went up, but it didn't come as high. Is that not pretty much exactly like what we're talking about here? You know, going up, just making another push. Yeah. You know, those comparisons kind of bleed over pretty quickly. And ultimately, like, when this broke out was a time of, and you guys are like, well, you just scaled out the comparison. Can't do that, Booksy. Well, you can if you're just doing a comparison of, like, MACD, for example. What's interesting is it's divergent, right? So this actually comes lower and the MACD comes higher on the daily, right, on that push. My point being that, like, when you're doing it proportionally, you have to kind of scale it. So anywho, what was interesting, though, also was the, and I say interesting a lot, don't I? I think it was the weekly, I want to say. I'm going to go back and look at it. I think on the weekly, there wasn't really any change. Yeah. So this is fascinating to me. If you look at the weekly, there is no, like, almost no major directional change until like the last minute on this push, meaning like it's consistently below. And even still, like, it does start kind of diverging here a bit, starting in March 2022. It sort of indicates almost a bottom, like more of an auto reaction, as you might expect. And it's very different than I remember seeing what we saw here on the weekly in terms of like strength, right? Really different. So if you look at the weekly here, this looks almost like apples and oranges, right? It's like complete, I'm not even apples and oranges, like apples and, I don't know, celery or something. I don't know how close those are to each other, but like, it's just really different is what I'm trying to say. There's a lack of directional change in this divergence. Like going into this bottom is all 100% like divergent on the weekly. Whereas even doing the comparison to here in March, the weekly doesn't make any sense. It's completely the opposite. You see that? So like I am doing these comparisons, but I wanted to point out that like even still, this technically still looks way more bullish than what happened in March. And I wanted to illustrate that before we go forward. It does have more of an appearance, perhaps, to what happened back here. Now, it's important to note that even in the midst of this, right, there is kind of some continuity there. But even in the midst of this, it's like where these things happened at very different points. And then if you notice, like the distance here is a really, really long distance of just kind of sideways and up. That doesn't ever really occur on the weekly in 2020, for example, on the MACD. So like, even if I were looking at this saying, oh, it's more similar to 2020, there's some definitely major differences, you know. I would suggest to you guys that it looks a little bit, to me, it looks a little bit more like what happened here again in August. And that's why I've been trying to say, like, I still think we're missing like a push up. So it's weird because like August or September 2020, August 2022, maybe March, if you're looking at a smaller scale, those to me reek more truth. We're not going up to break out necessarily, but you're going up to push up again to redistribute, right? And check certain levels. And then the question, of course, is do you have to do that, Books? Do you really have to do that? Well, no. I'll say this, though, okay? If StockFather's right, and I've been kind of rambling a bit, I know. He's like, losing my mind. You guys are like, you're losing your mind, Booksy. Listen, if StockFather's right, and we just drop, here's my opinion. I actually think that brings about perhaps a greater chance that we run in January as opposed to what I was thinking, which is that you don't really take off again until June, like of next year. So the difference is that you get a short temporary push now and then a long-term distribution all the way down to basically June of next year, like a 6-month almost sell down period, versus a really rapid drop now, and then potential is there. Because when we did the analysis, I know my mind is messed up sometimes, and I get scatterbrained when I'm doing the streams, and I'm trying to like pick out things and decide what matters and what's relevant, and I don't always take a breath, and so it sounds like I'm rambling and I'm not saying much, but in my mind what I'm doing is I'm thinking about every time we've charted this, and like there are some times we've charted it and the outcomes are pretty much all the same. There was one time when we charted this that I distinctly remember that the outcome was quite different, and it was dropping sooner than later. And it had to do with an upside down version of the AMC chart that we looked at. We were doing those comparisons after I did the MPW comparison. We did an upside down comparison. And what struck me was that it didn't necessarily look like it had to come back up to like 8s or 9s. It looked like, oh, you could probably achieve it by just dropping now. You don't even need to get a new low. You just come down there, hit that mark, and then reverse. Well, those are things that, again, like I think are important to take into consideration because that was a very unique setup. I didn't talk about it that much. At the time, I kind of was like, well, that's interesting. It doesn't really look like it'd have to do that. It looks like it could just go down and then it would be finished, sort of like a double test on the bottom because it looked right? It compared really well at the time to what we were doing. So again, like, is there more than one way to achieve the same goal? Yeah. Is the market predetermined in such a way that only one possible outcome will ever happen? No, right? I don't think that's the case. So coming back to like this area, just kind of reverse, hit the brakes, go in reverse now. Coming back to this comparison that we have to, in March, I'd be curious to know what his thoughts are about this because there is a decent buy-in here, which I think this is this is a good point of contrast, perhaps, like ways of understanding the market. Is a decent amount of contrast, I guess, in what happened. But like, notice that early on in this range, there's a adequate amount in these tops. There's an adequate amount of volume coming in down here. You can kind of see it if you look carefully. So I'm looking now at January and February of 2022. I think at the time, if you were to do a similar comparison here, right? I think at the time you'd probably look at this and say that, again, doing this comparison, I'm going to go back to maybe the 4 hour on this one. We're on the 2 hour on March, and I'm on the 4 hour. I could probably be on the daily as well. If we were going to do this comparison, I think it's fair to say that after this sell down, that there's a really simple like double up thrust kind of M shape right here that's attempting to kind of push back up. It's the kind of the greater stopping power, and then it sells off hard one more time and comes lower. And if you had looked at this in January of 2022 and you had said, I think this is a sign of weakness, I would be very curious to know what his thoughts are, particularly on this, because if I said the same thing here, right, and I've mapped it out, I don't really see a great deal of difference in terms of the remaining lows that occur. There's really not that much difference at all. Like, you come back up here, and these are distributive movements in nature at these tops, right? And then it just starts creating a series of tops to the downside, and it gets to the end, and it's really like kind of minor. And we've talked about this quite a bit already. But just to kind of illustrate that same point, I would be very curious to know what he would think about that. Like, how is that like drastically different? You know, we do get some buy-in at these bottoms. Obviously, volume right now, it's hard to see on my chart. It looks really light. Also, we're kind of crammed up here, so let me collapse some of these things because I don't want to make it like really messy. Yeah, it helps a little bit. I could probably adjust the contrast on the volume. I keep it lower because it just makes the screen really messy for me. I can see it. You guys might not be able to see it, but I'll do my best to describe it. I think that maybe you could argue that back here the volume was more bullish, and so therefore that's why it's different, and there's way more distributed volume here. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I could see somebody arguing that. But I think in the beginning, like, this doesn't really feel like buy-in. Like, this feels like a selling volume here. This almost looks like it's about to distribute again because it's coming up and the volume's all in the top. Like, if you look at the peak volume areas, it's right there. You know, it's going into that peak volume region. Same deal back here. So what's interesting is, like, after that apparent sign of weakness, right, there's this kind of sell down period that occurs where you're coming back up and you're pushing up and you're pushing up. I don't see any volume in this bottom here, like, at all, coming off of like $81. This is looking backwards again now, right? I do see a decent chunk of volume right here on the reaction, but there also was a decent chunk of volume here. You could argue that's just shorts covering or whatever before the final sell down. So if he were calling that a sign of weakness, and then you looked at the same model here and you said, well, what's similar, what's different? I think you could probably make an argument again that there's a lot of similarities in the nature of this push down, right? Where you're getting those major volumes again in the peak. So there's a 1-2 peak right here. This was going into all that roaring kitty stuff. 1, 2, and that's where most of the volume is after that apparent SOW. So after that apparent sign of weakness, there's like all this volume that's being dumped or pushed into these tops where you're getting a lot of sellers and stuff. And then the rest of the time is just one massive effort to like drive the price back down to those levels. Again, it still looks kind of bearish. You know, there are plenty of places here where there's distributive action. You know, I wouldn't say that a creek is held indefinitely at any point. There's definitely some markers here that are stronger than others, but if we use a similar kind of model, and this is what I did on this one, is I went to the last kind of major push down region that I found, which was right here on September 16th. I think this area on the 13th and the 16th is probably best representing the area that you see here on March 22nd. Now it looks different, but I think that's on, again, just about timing. I don't think it really makes any other, there's not really anything else to say. Why do I think that? Because when you look at the M shapes and you look at that main uptrend, notice that right here, back in February of 2022, when it dipped really low and then it reacts up and then it goes sideways again and drops that, it's specifically dropping this like blue line. All right, and this blue line had been support for a little while. This blue line coming up. We see the same thing essentially happen back here, and it's like there's a support line coming from that SOW up to the top, and it's ultimately not broken. You know, I mean, there's a couple obviously that you could draw, but this one's not broken until right here. So there's this really clear kind of marker for me anyways that I think is the most accurate suggestion of like a middle marker. Like where is the middle of the major waves? And it's right here for AMC. And if I take these, I've got a couple of parallels here, but if I take one and just kind of drag it over, you sort of see what I'm saying. Like this is where it pushed through, and we could probably do another one just to kind of match the blue line, like right there. Right. So there's a couple places that you could maybe identify, but most of them, you would say that this is kind of a double sign of weakness right here on AMC. Like it pushed beneath that trend once, came up again, and then pushed it again twice. That to me represents that kind of squishy middle that you see again on the left chart on February. So if you're following me, I'm doing this on purpose because I'm trying to demonstrate that I don't personally see like a huge difference in the two, but there are some places, especially at the very end, which do need to be addressed as different, and we'll see. You know, we'll see what that yields. But I see this as like, okay, so there's clearly like plenty of times on this downward motion where the outermost creek is kind of checked and rechecked, and it's pushed, and there's distributions that are happening along these tops, you know, these push downs, and you have this walk down that's occurring over time where you're consistently getting lower lows, right? And then I wanted to address like, well, what about the volume? Well, it's still much like in these sell downs. There's a lot of volume in these sell downs. The only other place you see decent volume is right after kind of this pick me up in the middle. Another argument could be made, and I think it's a valid one, is that, well, maybe all of this is like, you know, one big left side or right side or whatever. I don't really care. You know, you can do it different ways. We already know there was a breakdown. It's a wave, right? And there was a breakdown wave that happened in July, so it didn't follow through, right? There's another one that happened even shorter term. But in terms of like the largest, most macro kind of big picture wave, I still think this is the most comparable, and that's why I'm using it right here, okay? So when I see it as like, all right, there's a top, it's trying to like push it low beneath a certain price. It finally kind of achieves that directionally, and there's really only a couple places. Maybe it's easier in March because there's only like really two places maybe where you might question it. It's basically in March 9th and then that March 4th breakdown. And those are kind of the big walk downs. And we've got a couple. We've got one on right now on September around the, I don't know, 13th. And then the next one's around October 1st. That area right here, you know. And I just find that to be way too similar in nature to what we're experiencing right now. So when we look at the big picture, it's like, I think he could be right that this is indeed a bearish outcome, and that it is gonna go down, right, at some point. But this is important, and this is what I'm trying to say, is that back here, once it hit that low and this kind of reacts back up, this is where we have maybe a difference of opinion, perhaps, and I think this is important. There isn't a lot of volume in this bottom here, and I agree with StockFather about that. There's way more volume in the sell down than there is in this buy up, and that is bothersome. So it looks like an LSPY. But that being said, if you look at this back in the day and you're just examining like, well, what's happening here? It's the same deal. Like, you do get a bit of more of a spike in volume coming off the bottom in March than you do here. I agree. Yeah, but then the volume kind of dissipates and just dies. So as this is bouncing back up, that volume is dropping pretty rapidly back down to like average volume. There's not even really like a great retest back here. I mean, once it gets back above 81, that's kind of the only place that you might consider like, okay, well, it came up and it checked it. That was a level that was used back here. We can do the same thing. We don't have to be obscure about it. We've got one right at 432. That's where we're at right now. That's the one I'm choosing to use at the moment because it has two other bottoms back here. Does that look familiar to me? Yeah, it looks familiar. Like, this also had early on established like kind of an early in and out mode, right? Where this had pushed low and then it reacts back to the upside and then it makes a new low, higher low, and then it comes back up. And we've talked about this frequently lately because this is a model of breakout where you see this makes a stronger reaction than that first push. So again, if you're just listening, bear with me. I'll try to do my best. AMC's at 436. Try to do my best to explain it with prices, but you're probably not, it's not going to be relevant unless you know all the reverse split prices by heart. You're not going to be able to see the March comparison. Like, if I tell you the price is $100 here, you're going to be like, what? What does that even mean? Most of us probably wouldn't know what that is. So my point being that like that early move right here, which is coming off that area around the SOW, that early move right here is most similar to what we experienced. And you could make a case that it's here or that it's here. Either one, right? You can see the levels as they're represented in this region. Here, I'm just adding more boxes. I'll just keep them the same. You get what I'm saying? It's basically that 430 area. And there's another possibility, which is around 460. And 460 was the one that kept coming up for me because I was like, well, that's a really strong one as well. So you got 430 and 460 as like the primary kind of bottoms. You don't really have that back in March. There's really one main one. And then, you know, you see that when we did the double push down, we pushed through the 460 and then we came down to near that 430. It went to like 415 or something like that in extended hours. So it actually pushed through both of those levels while also pushing through the creek that was rising. So we take those forward and you look at what happened later on, you know, again, there's like a lot of comparability here, like comparability, right? You can see that the setup for this head and shoulder, it does kind of have that actually. This inverted head and shoulder type motion on this rebound, absolutely, you know, comes up through those levels and it hits here at, and this is 81.28. And if we look here at the similar range, we're talking about the exact same things right here. Now the model gets a little bit mushy. So at this point, you might be thinking like, well, all that's well and good, but if it's an LSPY, it won't matter because it'll just break down. And again, I would say, yeah, I don't disagree with that. But let's talk about, we didn't talk about the slingshot a bit, but let's talk about these levels and like what to expect then. If it does break down, what would it look like versus a breakout? And how would you, compare the two? Well, again, like I don't see a huge difference. So for me, it's going to be a little bit biased. If you're watching and you're able to watch, I would suggest to you that you kind of open your mind about it and just think about it with me. And if you decide that you don't agree, then that's fine. You don't have to agree. It's not a requirement to listen to the stream. In fact, disagreement is usually better because it brings about a little bit more in terms of, perhaps the word is learning. You tend to learn more, right, through disagreements. Yeah, maybe. This is a little weird. Maybe. Let me try something real quick. This has me curious now. Not quite. What if it's on the breakdown though? I'm slowing down a little bit. I want to take my time now and like kind of look at where these breakouts are. I think this is pretty steep, so I think the breakout, it really is on that 1 bar candle, and that's about as far as I'd take it. So that's not quite right. But there is a bit of a curve there. My guess is that this is like a parallel to another wave. Does that make sense? So like there's probably a series of these curves that you could use. We have something similar in our current time frame, so without going any further on that, might just want to use those, because I think they're probably comparable to these guys. Pretty similar. So my guess is if you took this and just created a series of like parallel curves, you probably find that there's a lot, yeah, of gravity there, like things that are attached to it. So that when you look left to right, you're like, oh, that could be this level right here. Yeah, I mean, it's critical levels. That makes sense. So I'm not sure that's really going to be super helpful then. So let me not do that. I wanted to demonstrate the wave being similar, but now that I look at it, I'm not sure I can do that with kind of a clear conscience, I guess. I don't want to like fudge it. This to me reeks of like it's trying to hold on to a wave and then it breaks down. And that's what we see here. It's a hold on and the breakdown, hold on and breakdown. That's why I was trying to draw the comparison, but now I'm not sure I want to do that. I'll try one more thing and then I'm going to give it up because I don't want to do it if it's not going to work. So that would be like there. I think this should be here on this jump, which means that this is a little off, but we'll fix that later maybe. Just shift it over a bit. Actually, I could just fix it now. I'm talking about. Yeah, right there. Yeah, so this falls pretty well into line with the idea that you'd be in an SOS by late November if it does follow that wave. Because it has a sense of right there. So that's the symmetry one. It has a sense that it's kind of moving away from maybe a bullish outcome. And we've seen that on the cat ears. And usually what I do is I do the bottom. So I'll like use this as like the bottom to trajectory, like to do bottom trajectory to see where it's maybe going to go. Anywho, but I'm not sure that's super efficient use of our time right now. So I don't really want to mess with that anymore. Anyways. Let's not do that. So I'm going to get rid of that. I like that arc. It's just not... Maybe I'll keep it, but I'll make it lighter. It just doesn't feel like super relevant unless I can make the same one over here, and I don't know if I can. So anyways, so I see a lot of continuity in the early formation of this range back here. So I think there's a sign of weakness, and what we see is that after this sign of weakness, the price is driven up, and then it's distributing on like a parabolic pattern back down, and this does form a spring, and it does break the range, and there's no doubt that it does that. So it's interesting because, again, I think with a similar mindset you could look at something like this and say, all right, there was a big run up and there's a sell off. All right, so now we're talking about a new potential range after this sell off. So ignore the fact that there's this big run up for just a second, because I get it. You can't really ignore it on the big picture, but just short term, if we're just looking at the range here, this is what we're talking about with the sign of weakness. I think there's still just like a really simple comparison to be made that looks very, very similar. Volume profile wise, I mean, yes, I do believe that the one in March maybe was a little stronger in terms of like bullish action, right? But we get like the same general result. So it follows like really well, pretty much the same pattern. And then we get to the end and you have a very similar end. So like we had talked about this previously when I talked about that rising accumulation and what I thought might be going on there, and whether or not it is or isn't one, we could still debate that. You know, hey, it's kind of peaking volume here, not down bottom. That's kind of backwards. Well, this also has some peaking volume. Peking, duck. Just kidding. This also has a ramp in volume after that first buy-in. The volume drops and then it ramps back up. We don't see that kind of in here unless it was like disguised buying. There's no peak in volume, but it does ramp a bit, you know, going into the end. So arguably, you know, that's still there, that ramp right there. So again, if I had looked at this in the previous time frame, I think you could have argued, though maybe we didn't, because I think both of us thought it was bullish, and perhaps there's something else I'm missing here that he's seeing. But I think you could have argued that this was an LSPY back then. And I remember some people saying stuff like that, like it looked like a bear flag. So I find it to be a curious example of possibilities there, you know. And ultimately what we see is that the move after this is pretty straightforward, you know. And we essentially just move from this, which is a rejection off the top. And I had been mentioning this for a little while, like it would probably come back pretty far, and it did. I said 444 and then I said 436 at another time. It's on my other chart if you want to like see right here. We talked about like this one. I'm basically just rebuilding it again, the chart on the other side. I don't know why I didn't just use this one. It would have been a lot faster. That I thought it would come back to 444 or 436 again. It came a little low, but again, I think that region arguably is still like a support region, so it doesn't really make a huge difference to me unless it goes below like 430, in which case I'm looking at 424 down here, 425, but that's still like the same. That's not different. So we thought it might build up into like more of a parabolic motion. It did do that. We saw an M cross here, like a 1, 2, 3, and then 4. It did do that. It just took a long time, you know? If you're wondering like if anything really changed, no, it didn't. And part of the reason why I didn't even bother streaming yesterday is because it just didn't really feel relevant. What I said earlier was I thought it was going to do this. I'll show you exactly what I thought it was going to do. And I thought if it goes low, it might go here, or it might be at like 444. So like that. So I think we had said it would come up to 450 and then come back down to like 444 or something like that. You know, I think we had done it like this, right? So this was my motif. This is what I was thinking about, and I thought it'd come back pretty low. And on the big picture, it's like, well, could that still be happening? Sure. I mean, maybe it's happening like longer term. I don't really care how you want to do it. If you want to do it like this, you can, where this is the big cat ear, and then it's actually going to sell low here going into earnings. That's fine. Like just stay really compressed going into earnings. That's the same thing. It's just wider spread. Why is it the same thing, Booksy? What if it's breaking different levels? It doesn't really matter because what's happening is the same, right? Is that you're selling off, like this is a distribution to get you lower. And so if it happens to be that that distribution is here, well, so what? You know what I mean? Like the big push-up happened already. It didn't go high enough, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That's my biggest concern right now. If I had to be concerned about one thing, it's that. Um, and then it came down, it made a little push low, and then it came back up to distribute again, get more sellers involved, and then it dropped down again, and now we're back down to this level. One of the reasons that I'm doing this is because there's a model that I've been using for quite a long time in March, which is that buy-in model. And I don't find it exclusively there. I find it in a lot of places. There's a little one in like August to August it's more of August in 2021. There's another right before the big run up in January. And there's a few others, like there's one in August of 2022. There's another one that kind of happened right before the other August push, which was the judge's earn thing. That was that low before the big pump to like 8 at the time. Those are things that I can completely lost on this chart right now. I got to get back to March. I'm trying to see if I can see it on the 1 hour, because you might be able to see what I'm talking about. Anyways, it happens quite a bit. It's not like only here, but I like the way it looks here, so I use this one to help me a lot. Because again, it's really simple. So it's right there. It may be a little bit challenging to see, but so there's a push up. I'll illustrate it for you. There's a big push up right here, and then it drops back down, and then it goes into like a little cat ear, and then it goes into like a shallow S-curve low. And this is what happened again March 21st, 2022. And that's just a simple, like, as you can get, like, okay, we pushed up, we checked the resistance, we pushed it, then we came back, we distributed along it, we come back down in a sell-off, and then we get a buy-in here at the very end, right, that takes you back up. What's interesting about this is that there's no breakdown of any creeks whatsoever in the March run-up, and we don't have any breakdowns whatsoever here, not yet. What's also interesting is that this is the only time that it has like a major retracement is at the very end, because it goes into like almost like a parabolic motion. And if you look at March, you can see it as a wedge if you want. So I'm doing a really nitty-gritty comparison now, but you can see this for sure as like a giant wedge that broke down and then reversed. That's definitely a possibility here. It looks like that to me because of the fact that it stopped above the breakout here, right in this little pocket before it took off. It looks like it came back into the wedge and then it took off again. It just looks like a weakness, right? And then it breaks down. And this is the only major retracement you have where it seems to lose a creek. What's fascinating is that even in this, it didn't really lose much at all. The only one that is lost is kind of this guy. This is the only one. And if you look at the big picture, all these other creeks that are jumped are just jump, 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 jump. There's no like backups that go way below previous creeks. There's no real strong weaknesses. It looks pretty good overall. Okay. We see something very similar here. I don't want to go much more into that right now, but like there's a lot of that same kind of motion where like, hey, it comes back. Is it going to break down? And it's like, no, it didn't really break down. It just kind of held it and moved on. And you see that consistently like on the way up. Until where? Until pretty much right here, like same deal. So notice that this is like the breakout point is actually on March 18th of 2022. It pushed above, came back down, and checked a low level on this. I would say it's like a bigger, I don't want to say it's a bigger creek, but the thing is like, look at where it is. So this had just come off of, at this point it wasn't $81. I don't remember. It was somewhere in like the 9s or something. That sounds about right. Or you might even say, well, shouldn't it be $8.10? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think it's that exact. I don't think it's exactly. There's like two split variables. Anyways, point is that it had made these like this quadruple bottom thing that's kind of ugly, and then it came up above, and this is where it really checks that support region. Right after that, it pushes up, creates a secondary support right above it, pushes up, and then when it drops back down, it creates that support again. We would say that, or it checks that support again. We would say that that's pretty much right where we're at right now, although it looks like it's kind of dropped it a little bit. It didn't really hold it that well. What's bizarre to me though is that I don't see this as like a breakdown yet. So I had posted in the Discord group earlier in the day, I think, that I'm not really sure I saw a breakdown here. Like it went to a low of 432, it looks like. And when I go back to these bottoms, they're all 432. 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, there's like a lot of bottoms right here at like 432, right at that marker. And that was kind of like right after we came back from the upside. We challenged that 432. We generated a pretty steep creek going this way. So this is a distinct difference between where we are now versus where we were back in March. So this M cross, as you can see, it breaks through what appears to us as a wedge rising. Clearly, you know, this would be the middle M1, 2. And that middle M shape is easy to see here. It's a little harder to see in our current time frame, and I had struggled a bit with that. I told you guys about that. I was like, I'm not really sure exactly where it is, you know. But I would say, like, I don't like the idea of like the one-to-one stuff, but I'd say it's pretty much right here. Like this is the same middle M space. I'll make it a different color on the chart so you can see it visually. I'll make it like green. So this would be like the jump. Yeah. So one of the key differences is the angle of this is quite different. This obviously, if you were using that as like an angle of like, well, it's not going to go below that again. This never quite reaches it. But in theory, it could have. Like it could have come down to like this marker. I think it would have been fine. Like back in the day, you would say. I think it could have been fine. Like this is where it ultimately built out that support. This is where those resistances were. It could have been quite steep. It could have come all the way back down to near that bottom, in my opinion. I think it would have been okay. It didn't do that, but it could have. Potentially. What's interesting is that if you only look at this as a horizontal, and again, I'm looking at a 1 hour chart over here on March, you might say, well, it didn't break that level. Actually, it did. So there's a slight wick through. So it does actually come back through the floor also right there. So when we look at this on our current time frame, we know the scaling's a bit different. We know that this walk down looks a little different. There's an issue because it didn't come super, super high on this top. We have to talk about that and address it. Maybe those are all differences that are strong enough that it can cause us to sort of say, well, I don't think it's going to go, or I think it's going to look really different, you know. But at the end of the day, I have to kind of just go with my gut and say, like, I don't think yet it's broken here, and I think the goal might be to kind of pin it in this little region and wait for earnings before making a decision. There's a lot riding on this pocket region we're coming into right at earnings here. There's a lot riding on that. You can see visually on the chart, I've got like 3 interceptions there. It may seem a little arbitrary to you, but I don't think it's arbitrary at all. I think that that red line that you're seeing is indeed like kind of like the area that you make or break in an LSPY or a spring, and we're coming back down on top of it. I think that the rise there on that line is your main lower trend. Again, we're coming down on top of it. I've got to kind of finagle my chart a bit because I need to get these snapped so that I can just snap this one and not make it look super weird. There we go. So there's a really strong pocket right here, right? I think that region does better to hold for sure. But if you're going to back up here, that's probably where I'd do it. Now, the bigger issue comes in what happens after, you know, because as we know, like, all right, so what, Booksy? You've made your point. Maybe the rise is very similar. There's similarities there, sure. But did it come up high enough? That's a big question. We don't know for sure the answer to. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it looks distributed. But at the same time, like, I look back in this, and I'm saying, like, he was saying the volume's all high right here in these peaks coming up. I don't disagree, but that's the same thing that applied back here as well. Like, most of the volume green bars that you see, or any of these high bars, they're going into these like peaks back in March, and they're showing like a buy-in gentle buy-in from operators. So I'm not really sure. Again, I get the big volume push out missing. I see that as like a problem maybe back here. I get it. But in terms of this being like, oh, it's higher volume because there's on these peaks here, I don't really, not sure that I understand like how that's different from what we experienced. I don't know. That's my opinion. Maybe in like the March build out. So what happens next, Booksy? We gonna go or not? You're talking for like an hour and a half. Well, you haven't said anything. I've said a lot. To summarize it, and I'm just joking with you guys when I kind of pick on myself. To summarize it, yes, like there's certainly a bear case here, and I think it's a valid case, and I don't want to ignore it. And I think there's a lot of validity to the possibility of it. However, I find it to be way too close to what we've seen before as kind of a build out for like a temporary rally, right? I wouldn't necessarily call it like a perfect accumulation. March wasn't that way. It did break out to the upside, but the argument at that point just has to be like, all right, really the question is not, can it do that? Because that's not really a question in my mind. It's does it need to do that? And that's a difficult question for us to answer. And when I look back at March, I think about that as well. Like, did it need to do that? Like, I don't know. Like, why did it need to come all the way up here instead of just, reacting just above? At this point, it wouldn't have been 113, but like where this is at 113. Why couldn't we have just come back up and then sold off here and come down? Why did we have to come all the way back up to the top? What needed to be checked? I don't know. I think you can go through all of this stuff and say like, well, maybe they wanted to come back up and distribute along a particular level for some other reason. I think it just has to do with operator buy-in levels and what they want to get out of it in a sell-off. I don't really think at this point that, I could do anything that I haven't already done. Like, I've already made a case for why I think this makes a lot of sense. If you go back to March, the only case that makes a lot of sense there is, well, the target in mind was a wraparound of the top instead of this, so they're using it to sell down and start a massive sell down through the range. So they're kind of alleviating all that buying. They pump it back up. They use it for their advantage, take it up high so they can sell back through and resell this whole level that they walk down through. And the same thing could be said here about this move, right? The problem is that at that point, the analogy kind of breaks down because it's like, well, if you were saying that this is what happened in this bottom and so on and so forth, there's no sign of weakness before. It's not like this guy. It didn't have a bottom range like that. There's definitely indication you could come back down. But like, this stays up pretty high. This obviously went through. It just doesn't make sense to me. My point being is that was this range ultimately about back in March? Ultimately, was it about going back up? Yes and no. It was a move deliberately to kind of create a macro distribution. So there was a desire to drive the price high in order to go low, which we see very frequently on AMC. But specifically in this case, the localized range has a spring, but it also has what seems to be like a sign of weakness, if that's what we're counting as such. So my question is, like, what prevents this from being very similar? Where you have like a drive back up towards the 8s or so, which that comes from my own methodology. I don't know if anyone else would necessarily agree with that. Some people have said 8s and 9s on their own, but like I've said it for other reasons, kind of exclusive to my own thought process. I just think that when StockFather is saying like it looks like distribution, I'm kind of curious what he would say about March, like this early March, January to March setup. And like what distinguishes it from what we see here doesn't seem to be as great of a gap maybe to me. It seems very similar in a lot of ways. That the idea of driving this price down in order to kind of break this creek later and drive a rally in order to sell down. And that's what our argument has been, is that not that it just rallies and runs to the moon. I've heard people say I'm super bullish or something. I'm bullish in the short term, but this is really only like a month. This is from now until basically on my chart, early December. That's it. I think if we're going to rally, that's probably where we do it. Right? And we would peak end of November, early December, and then we'd start breaking down. And I really don't think at that point it's bearish or bullish again until freaking June. I mean, it's me. For me, I'm like, frankly, I look more bearish than bullish. So while I get, again, like this idea that like, well, this could be very different. This could be like an LSPY and you could break down. I still think there's a lot of similarity. And I wonder if we're going to drive the price up one more time in a really strong way, right? This is like a buy-in low. This was like a walk down, 1, 2, 3, whatever. Just like we walked down here. We're driving the price down low to get more buy-in, right? We're instigating sell-offs, get more buy-in, so that we can drive the price up again and redistribute. And that's a word that people don't like, but guys, it really wouldn't have mattered. And I know I'm kind of going long about this and you're probably like annoyed with me, but I genuinely think it wouldn't have mattered that much if we had run earlier versus now. Because like I had originally had this, well, after July anyways, because once we went up in July and we started distributing on this top, I was like, well, it's not taking a shorthand path to get where we want to go. And then really the window from about August 15th till September 15th, actually, it's almost like a perfect month, maybe August 12th to September 12th, is almost just all sideways, waiting to see what's going to happen. That was the only other region that I thought we might get that push out. And this is when I had talked about like coming back up to 13. But the TA hasn't really changed. Like the whole point of that was then it would drive you back down low. Now, that's funny to me because like at the time, people were like telling me, well, so-and-so says that it's going to go to 20, or so-and-so thinks it's going to go to the 20s. What do you think about 20s? And I'm like, no, I don't think 20s is going to work. And here's why, and yada, yada, yada. What's funny to me though about it is that even in the midst of all that, it's like we're nitpicking about the highs that haven't even happened yet. We'd never even broken out, you know? And it was like, oh, well, so-and-so says it's going to go to 20s if it runs. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, maybe, but I don't think it's going to be high. But even that, it's like that whole thing implied, the idea of going to the 20s implies that you're going up here and that you've basically broken out of like some huge, huge, huge levels. I mean, massively important horizontal levels, right? Back in the 20s that you could essentially like say it's basically like a breakout. I mean, look at my creek, where my creeks are. That would have broken out of those creeks. And I had argued that I didn't think it was going to do that. I didn't think it was that bullish. So it's kind of funny to me because like I am bullish short term. I think there's a possibility here for a huge spike or a huge move up. But realistically, like that's really just me saying that I think it's pushing up to sell back down. And I'm not super bullish until maybe mid next year. I think we have a really strong chance of having a 6-month period where we go from the lowest lows we've ever been to back up to February of 2026. I think we're going to be back up in the 80s. So I find it to be very fascinating to me that I had some people also in the Discord that were saying, well, arguing about whether or not I'm right about certain things and like how often I'm right. I don't keep track of every little thing, but I know where I was right and I know where I was wrong. And I'm telling you guys that I may have been right about some of the biggest run-ups that we've ever had on AMC. I think each one in their own right, I've been pretty darn close with those big moves. But to be very honest with you guys, and I know I've kind of hard on myself about identifying tops, but really ever since this, maybe a year ago, 2023, August 2023, I've pretty much identified all these tops. And it's funny because the only bottom that I really felt like I called was like April to May. I don't feel as strongly about the others. I just think I was kind of wishy-washy about it, and I was waiting for breakouts. And I'm looking back at the last year, I've called way more tops. There have been more tops than bottoms, obviously, but like I've called them out like way better than I've called out the bottoms, you know. So it's funny because like they were talking about on the Discord group, like, well, how many big run-ups does he call? It's like, guys, I can go back and you can look at the data. I don't care, but you can go look at my call-outs here and here. You know, I don't really feel like there's anything else. Or you can look at my call-outs here as well. And then the breakdown sucked, but that was kind of a big whiff on my part. But then I, you know, called out the tops in February of 2023. I didn't call out the bottom in July 2023. I was gone. I don't remember what I was doing, but this whole region was kind of meh for me anyways. It was all sideways. I didn't really do much in this period. I think everybody was kind of dead. But it's just funny because, like, yeah, like there's been a couple misses that are really big. This one was one. This was a big hit and a miss. This one was kind of a mixed bag because I didn't think it was going to go down. But then again, it's like there was so much stuff involved in that. It's kind of hard to judge. But I found it to be very kind of amusing because I genuinely agree with people who say like you shouldn't really listen to YouTubers as a way of like trading. I think that's not wise. I think getting an idea of price movement and learning more about how the market moves, you find people that you gravitate towards that help you learn and get better, and then you take that and you do your own due diligence. Absolutely. But I find it to be a bit ironic that they were talking about like run-ups, but really like that's only half the story. Like the tops have been a big part of this story, you know? It's the things that people don't want to hear, right? And I called this top as well. I mean, I called the run-up and the top, so I don't know what to say about that. And it's funny, this idea of like calling things out. It's like the predictive nature of TA is there, but it's more about probabilities, you know? It's not like somebody who's sitting there like with a crystal ball, like predicting the future, how events are going to take place. It's more about sort of identifying what's already there and saying this seems probable and that seems probable. And then when it happens, it's like people are like, oh, you called it out. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I did, but at the same time, like other people could have looked at it and come to the same conclusion. It wasn't like I have some special knowledge where I just like called it out and it happened, like Babe Ruth calling out his shots or something. You know what I mean? It's like silly. So when I look at this locally and I'm thinking about this, I'm starting to hear that chatter come up again. And if you look at something like, oh, StockFather is completely the opposite. He thinks it's going to drop here, and so-and-so says it's going to distribute here, and they're bearish. Yeah, I don't see that as a problem. Like, that there's people that don't agree with this doesn't really faze me at all. Like, it makes sense to me that some people would not agree with this, that they think that it doesn't need to go up again. And I think there's a reasonable, you know, argument to be made that it could just be an LSPY. It just breaks down. It doesn't need to do something like this extraneous push up. I just got to be clear about my position when I say, like, I don't believe that it's doing it for no reason. And so I think that's kind of where we have to, you know, for us, we have to kind of make that statement of like, hey, I get where they're coming from. Where I'm coming from isn't me just saying a moonshot. I'm not sitting here like, you should buy, you should do this, you should do that. I'm not doing that, okay? What I'm saying is that it seems that if there's going to be a big move back to the upside, that this is the most likely place for that to happen. And then I think it's going to break back down again going into January, right? And if I'm wrong, then it's probably going to go down into January. And this is where things get kind of interesting. Like I don't see sideways as like a super strong option right now, because at this point, this range has been traded and traded and traded forever. We're finally back to the bottom. We've already tested the tops. So it just seems appropriate that at this point, and we've definitely traded the middle like to death. It just seems very appropriate at this point that we would make a decision, especially given our eminent catalysts. I think that it's important to note that there's a move happening. But it's like, that's another thing is like, well, Booksy, then just flip a coin, right? If you think that this or this. I don't know what to tell you except that, yeah, you could trade the stock market that way. I don't think it's wise to use that and like weaponize that against YouTubers though. Like people that are doing a lot of work, you know, because if so-and-so, whoever it is, StockFather, Spliffs, whoever, if they think that it's going to be bearish, they've put time and work into that. And that, therefore, I value that opinion a lot more than somebody who comes up to me and says, I think it's going to be bearish because I flipped a coin and it's bearish. Well, that's dumb. Like, okay, cool, man. Well, you're always going to have a 50% chance of being right. But that's given for anybody, you know? That's the playing field that we're already on. Now what are you going to do? Are you going to do any more work on that? Are you just going to accept that that's it and then treat everybody as if they're guessing blindly? Like, that's not really fair either. So if you go watch StockFather's video, don't sit there and think that he's just like blindly flipping a coin. Like he's analyzing it the way he sees it. And I think that I have a high respect for that, even if we disagree about it, and we do in this case. But even if we disagree about it, one of us will be right, which is great, but who cares? Like at the end of the day, it's really about the work being put in. And the journey is a big part of it. And I think that if you've been with me for a while, if this goes down and it doesn't go the way that we think it might go, or that I think it might go, you should know that I don't regret that journey. Like the things that I learned in this area have been really, really good. I don't count it as a huge waste of time. Now, that's true, and then another part of me will say, what's also true is that I might lose some money. Like I need to be really willing and ready to get rid of certain things that are not going to be profitable if it doesn't go my way. And so there's always a kind of a risk factor there of like, you can learn from that failure and that's positive, but the consequences are still there. So what would the consequences be if this rallies and then dumps? The consequences might be that you make money really quickly and you think it's going to go up, and then all of a sudden you flip red and it never returns. That's a serious danger, and you don't need to be in a position of constant second guessing, but I think it'll be pretty obvious for most of us at that point if it comes up and it bleeds back through this marker. Because this has been our creek for a really long time, and there's really nothing else to it. Like, we've had this for a long, long time. It's going to be pretty obvious if on the daily it upthrusts and comes back down through it. You know? I mentioned it a minute ago, and I kind of like didn't say anything else about it, but there was a one thing that did kind of bug me about this setup in comparison to what we were talking about in like this March setup. One of the biggest things that bothered me so far, it's one part is maybe a little bit on volume, even though I think you could argue this is a pretty low volume bottom with like high volume pumps. Maybe you could argue that that's a problem, but this is actually one of the bigger things that kind of bugs me. So you remember when it came up and I had estimated it might come to 472? Well, part of the reason for that was that I thought it needed to come above this top and like push the resistance at 468. And I was like, really, 468 is fine. We never made it there, did we? We got to like 464. Like we didn't quite come high enough. That does bug me a little bit. you know, and I mentioned it. I think somebody in the Discord said that, and I was like, yeah, I don't know, you know. What do you make of that, Booksy? How do you what do you qualify that as? You know, like how is that a bad thing? It didn't push resistance or what? Well, yeah, I mean, so historically, what's better for us is that when you come back up, that you push high and you push the resistance. If I ask the question, did this break the creek? That's a different question. The answer is no. Like, so in this case, here's how I'm measuring it, okay? In March of, and I'm just still on this March comparison bit, but I wanted to address this one last thing, okay? Here's how I'm measuring this creek. Where is it exactly? Why is it not following like a trend right here? Well, I'm looking at the high here on February 10th, and then this is in 2022. And then I'm looking at that March 4th breakdown level, because everything else that takes place between those two levels. And of course, there's that big like dip low in the middle. But ultimately, like this is where it finally goes down, right? And it breaks down and breaks through that now 88 level. This is kind of like the beginning and the end of this little area. Okay, so I'm doing the exact same thing right here as best as I can. And there's a couple marks that I've used. One is the very top from June 6th. That one seems really appealing to me as a possibility for that mark. The other one could be thought of as the top from here on July 8th. So it's kind of multiple points of interest, I suppose. I don't really like that terminology because people use it differently. That either one of those could be thought of as like the peak, right? And then where does the breakdown ultimately happen? Well, again, I think there's just a debate because it's scaling wise. You might say, well, it happened right here. That's the last hit. It's on September 16th. That seems right to us. So certainly that could be it. Maybe that's like the final say. Yeah, maybe. I think bigger picture wise, it's hard for me because I feel like bigger picture wise, I would probably use the high here on September 9th. Now, the issue is that it just depends on how you look at scaling. You know, like 1-2 versus 1-2 over here. Well, you can't make it, both can't be right, right? So which one is it? I guess like he's gonna say he's not sure, and that we have to just wait and see. That's what he's gonna say. I know it. Yeah, we're not sure. We're gonna have to wait and see. So screw you, Booksy. I don't know. Both of them seem valid to me. Both seem valid, and there's actually another marker that's right on that nose here as well. If you use different wicks, it hits that marker really well. I think it's more likely the lower one at this point, but I also don't know, like, because they're both pretty good. And I think the point is not to say like one has to be right, the other can't be right. I think they're both probably pretty valid. If you look at where this is knocked down to, when it all's said and done, it looks more like the lower one. And then the higher one really just looks like an up thrust that kind of pushes through it and checks it. And we don't see that back here in March. It kind of just reaches it. It doesn't push through it. Interestingly, and it is interesting to me, this does, however, back in March, make a higher high than the side over on the left side. And I find that to be kind of fascinating because, again, it's like, well, what's more important? I don't know. Which resistance has to be pushed? I don't know. Well, then you're not good to me, Booksy. Yeah, I know. It's very black and white in March. I think that lines up with the top. It also lines up with the breakdown. In where we are now, the current breakdown does not line up with the top. The breakdown meaning the cat ears here. They don't line up with the top. They do line up with the top region on October 4th, though, which is sort of interesting. I think that's kind of interesting to me, you know. Maybe this is early. Maybe we're still in like the middle of the move and we haven't actually made that push yet. What about that, Booksy? It's possible. You know, none of this really makes me feel like it has to be one way or the other just yet, because there's no I hate the idea of tracking fractals anyways, and I don't like the idea of trying to see like exactly where you are, because the waves are waves, and like there could always be another wave push here that comes back down. In fact, I'm pretty sure like I've got that marked off anyways. Like this guy could be a push up that then comes back down, you know, Friday. So like the waves are just waves. Like it doesn't make any real huge difference. Is it possible that this wave is actually this wave? It's going to push up above to 475, and then it's going to come back down and check some level. Yeah, I mean, sure. At the end of the day, what matters to me is like where are the resistances being pushed, and are we making those advances? And did we ultimately like push through the levels of support? And I think that is going to be a little different in each time frame. So is 464 the support, or is 460 the support? That's the questions you have to answer. If 464 is the support, then it didn't push through it, right? If 460 is the support, then it definitely did. So which is it? You make that decision, because I can't make that decision for you. What I will say is that 464 is, and 465 for that matter, was definitely used coming down in September frequently. I think that 460 was a little bit less used, but when I did the point and figure that I did, I thought 460 was a lot stronger. You don't really see a lot of support. It's like 461, you know, like that one to me was one of the strongest ones going through here. It's just all over the place. If you were trying to just identify bottoms, you'd probably say it's 461 to 462 predominantly, but then there's also places where it hits like 463 and takes off, or 462 and takes off. There's a little bit of an issue, right? Like you're not getting like continuity. So I don't think it's a simple like this is where the support is, but see, you're wrong. It's right here. Well, look, man, everybody's going to look at their indicator thing about support and resistance, and they're going to say it's right here, it's nowhere else. When we did the point and figure, I didn't find it to be super black and white, but it was definitely like that region. Like there was like a 5-cent region between 460 and 465. And so if I'm looking at it, I'm like, did this push that resistance between 460 and 465? No. Did it push the resistance above 460? Yes. It did push all the way up to 464. It did come back and check it. Technically, that's all it would have to do if that were the floor to show a push of resistance. Did it make a higher high than 468? No. So therein lies the problem, right? So I had said earlier that I thought it was going to come up higher, and it didn't. So my question now is not so much like, is that bad or is that good? It's more like we haven't we haven't really made that push yet. So like that still needs to happen if we're going to go. If we're going to go, we got to push above 468. We just have to. And then we got to come back down and we got to find support again. Probably above 450. That's my guess for Friday. Do I think that gives you a really simple path forward? Yes. I'm not going to apologize about it, guys. It's right there on the chart. Like, if you were to look at this and tell me, can it go up to make that push at 470 today, or like this week, and then drop back down and land at 450 and still be bullish? My answer is going to be yes. Okay? Some people are going to look at it and say no, because they're using a different line. It's that simple. My answer, yeah. That's the jump right there. What if it's a head fake? How will we know? Well, turns out that the operators hate you and they hate me, and they don't want to tell you whether or not it's going to go or not. So, sorry. Like, you're not going to know probably till Monday. And I know it stinks, but if it does what I think it's going to do and it goes up and pushes 470s, it's going to look like one of the two things, right? And it's going to be either or. And unfortunately, you probably won't know till Monday. If it jumps over and it holds this week, I'm going to count it, in my brain, I'm going to count it as a breakout until it proves me otherwise. I'm not going to look at it as a head fake. So if we can make that advance and we hold above 450, I think it's a breakout. I really do. And I think this is fine. Like for a backup, this goes right back down to that creek body. I think it's really strong. I don't see any major issues with that at all. But at the same time, like, I can see why some people might not necessarily agree with that, because they may look at it like differently, where like that's a push up beneath the other one, the other line that we talked about. So yeah, so what's your conclusion there, Booksy? You didn't really say much. So in conclusion, if we can hold, let's just wrap that up so we can move on and talk about some other stuff, because we talked forever about AMC, 2 hours. If we can hold above 430s right here going into earnings, I think there's a decent chance we're going to pop up to 470s and then come back down Friday into 450s. If we can stay above 450 going into the end of the week and we don't slide all the way back through here, that's important, then I think there's a good probability that that's the breakout that we're looking for. That's the move back out. Everything else from that point forward would have to be thought of as a bit speculative, and I don't think that there's much else we can do about it. Okay? When we talk about this as a LSPY versus like a potential spring, this is where the floor is. It could be holding. StockFather said that in his video. He said it could be a spring, but he's like, I just don't think it is. So he thinks it's less probable that this is a spring right here and that this is a recovery. But he said it's there, like it's an option. I'm just saying I think it is, because I think it's got striking similarity to what we've seen before in these kind of motifs that are there really to drive the price up in order to bring it back down later. That's a whole nother can of worms that we've already opened and closed today. I'm not going to go all the way through that again, but suffice to say, it's there. If I didn't do a good job of talking about the possibility of downside on AMC's chart, I wanted to make sure. I'm so happy that StockFather came back when he did. This is like a critical time, right? I wanted to make sure that I get this in there and we talk about it, because we've only got today and tomorrow, and then we're going to probably hear about elections. They could be as soon as tonight that you find a result, but I doubt it. Maybe tomorrow or the next day. Things are going to be crazy. Things are going to be crazy, you know? So if we go through this process and we don't ever address potential downside, then you can't possibly know like what to do if there's potential downside. So I love the fact that StockFather came back. I love that he is kind of bearish. I think it's great. I think it's a brilliant thing that you guys get to experience a bearish and a bullish outlook at different times. When you're planning the trade, can you make your cursor visible? It's not visible? What? That doesn't make sense. Well, we'll find out. I don't know how to make it visible if it's not visible. It might be because of the menu thing. So I don't know what to do. I could make... man, if it wasn't visible, then that sucks. I'm so sorry. Because we've been talking for a while. Smooth, Booksy. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry. I can tell you what positions I have, but it's not financial advice. If you want to hear it, I'll tell you. It's not been visible for a while now. Well, crap. Hopefully I was somewhat descriptive, but I'm sure I say here and there a lot. Gosh. C'est la vie. You see the charts, so I wonder if it's I wonder if I can mess with this. Maybe I can check on OBS. That's a pain in the butt, guys. I'm sorry. I wonder if I can make the cursor visible. Window capture. Scene. Media source. Image. Display capture. Maybe I can just go into the settings here. Interesting. I don't know. I'm going to look it up, though. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, GME to me looks a lot scarier to me than AMC does right now. Because GME had this big push up. It just needs to hold, but it makes me so nervous. You know. I do wonder if GME is going to come back down pretty low before its earnings, but it's got to break out 23, so it's just kind of chilling out. It makes me a little nervous. It looks like it's hooking. Let me look up real quick and see if I can fix this problem. I don't know how to fix it, so sorry guys, but I need to do some technical support on this technical analysis stream. OBS software not showing mouse cursor. What do you call it? Pointer. If OBS software isn't showing your mouse cursor, you can try these steps. Make sure your mouse battery is charged, blah, 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 blah. If they're on different radio channels, well, that's not it. Mouse settings, pointer options, show location of pointer when I press control. Press the control key to see your cursor. You can also watch this video to learn how to add a highlight to the cursor in OBS Studio. Well, I guess that's what I need to do. So I feel so bad now. So let me see if I can quickly. It says it's 50 seconds. Enable highlight mouse cursor in OBS. Let's try it.
So guys, as you can see, the software was shown here. So simply click on it.
Sorry guys. I'm gonna look at his thing and just watch. I don't want to get I don't want to get in trouble, so. Alright, I get it. So he's enabling it on his desktop. But then how do you do it on your OBS? Okay. I wonder if it's because it's in window mode and it's not in the screen mode. Yeah, so that didn't help at all. That was pointless. All he did was just add the highlight. What a dumb thing. Okay. Sorry guys, I'm trying to be a jerk about it, but people that make videos are fine. I'm just being grumpy pants. All he did was add a little bubble to it, and I was like, that doesn't help. I wonder if there's something you can do in TradingView. That might be an answer. It's probably nothing you can do in TradingView. Yeah, so the problem is that I think I'm on like a screen mode, and I'm not on. So I'm doing a window view instead of. Cursor. Oh. This is interesting. Let's call it cursor. I want to try something. Show cursor. Crop to none? I don't know. Well, that doesn't help. Why does it say show cursor here? It doesn't say show cursor there. Crop to window. Properties for display capture 4. Window. Cursor. Windows server. Cursor. Oh man, that's hilarious. There's a little window. You can do crop to window. No crop. No crop. That's just hilarious to me. Sorry guys, I'm messing around too much. window, cursor, desktop, menu bar. This is so confusing. What? That's so weird that you can do that on Spotlight, item 0. You don't even know what I'm doing. You guys are like probably pretty annoyed with me right now. Sorry. I mean, let's just do that, and then let's see if we can activate it and just see what happens. It just put it up in the top of the screen. There's my cursor, guys. Oh man, this is the worst. This is the worst streamer ever. This guy's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. Here, right here, around blah, 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 blah. Someone's gonna get whiplash trying to look at this. Right there, around this level, right there. Here, blah, blah, blah. This doesn't help you at all. You guys are like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Sorry. So what happened is that I'm using, I'm not using 2 screens. So usually I have 2 screens. And so I have one screen that's for streaming. And that way, everything I'm doing on that screen is being recorded. Well, what I did is I did a window stream, but for some reason the mouse doesn't show up. So then I added another. You guys want to see what my mouse is doing? You can see it in the corner of the screen. Isn't that stupid? Oh man. I think it's funny, but it's also like really annoying. You guys are like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Here, this is where my cursor is on the screen, but you can't see it on the screen. Isn't that bizarre? Whatever. I'm so sorry. This is like probably like horrible looking. Isn't that weird though? And you could even do that? It's bizarre to me. So I like cropped it and it did like an appearance window for the oh man, so bad. I guess what I could do is like shrink the window and just crop it to like that area and use that instead of instead of trying to do what I'm doing here. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna stop it. Don't worry. That's brutal. I'm sure. Let's get rid of that. Phew. All right, we're done with that. All right. Well, it is what it is. I'm sorry, guys. What I'll try to do is I will try to use the zoom tool. So there's a zoom tool on TradingView that you can use. I forget the hotkey for it. Is there not a hotkey assigned for it? Maybe not. But I can use like the zoom tool to like zoom in on different things. That might help a little bit. Next time I do it, I'll make sure I get my dual screen set up, and I'm not going to do it right now. There's just no point. Some folks were talking about IWM maybe breaking out. So I'm going to go over and check it out. Weird price action for IWM because we had a walk down that kind of broke out and then it went back down again. And I had thought that it might go down here, but instead it went up, then it went back down, which sort of changes the dynamic of it a little bit. It needed to break above 223 area, and it's right back to it again. It does look like it kind of came below and then back into that trend, which is always kind of a positive, in my opinion. Here, I can move this. You can see me moving the line, so you know where my cursor is at. So I'm going to drag in the line back over. Really, this should be like here on the breakdown. So you can see it lost the lower trend, which I'm wheeling, and then it recaptured it on November 5th. So it recaptured it right here with the arrow. I'll just draw an arrow there. And we're looking to see if it can break above 226. So ultimately, like, that's where we need to see it come back up to. If we don't get back up there, it could still distribute and come low. As cat ears go, that often happens where you'll do like a double top in the middle and then drop. So I don't want to be that guy that's like constantly trying to show bearish outcome, but we had talked about the nature of maybe coming down to get to that gap fill. And it may seem that that could not possibly happen again, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. If it breaks out, it's not going to happen, right? Let's just make it clear. But if this were like a cat ear, you definitely could see a potential drop here. You know, you could have like a secondary distribution and then come back down. You could distribute along 224 again and then drop low. And it's just pretty simple wave structure, like an S-curve, from the top at 227 all the way down to the bottom region at 214, 213. So even though I wasn't right about that, you know, this last week, we were talking about how I was kind of missed the boat on that. It's possible that it could still achieve that going into this week. So I'm a little nervous about that, actually, about something being announced on like Thursday or Friday and getting like a massive dump and just seeing this as like a huge wedge breakdown. So I'm going to keep it on the screen. I don't think that it's what I would love to have happen, but I just want to have that there. If it breaks out here, you know, decent chance that it could just run up pretty early. The only situation that we would have on IWM with a breakdown is if it drops low this creek, and then I think it could come really low. And then if you're looking at the screen, I just drew an arrow on it. It's like down here. Otherwise, I don't see it going down. So we've got quite a bit of space. AMC's at 0%. That's fine. GME's at 22.95. It's up 2%. That's fine. Somebody had mentioned WTO. I know that we don't look at it all the time. I like what's going on here with IWM right now. Looks pretty decent to me. And actually, let me double check one more thing before we move on. Yeah, it's trying to go above the widest creek. I would call it like maybe the fan is a better word, but you think about that expansion outward, it's kind of going above that level now. So our levels of support have been fine. Yeah, I think if we push up into the 223 to 224 area and then continue, we might be in good shape. All right. Yeah, I'm not going to go through every little stock in the market, but maybe do a couple more real quick. And I'll probably end a little early. It's a short stream, but it's okay. Tuesday afternoon on election day. I don't know, man. I kind of like this. I didn't like that it didn't break here. This bothered me, and there was an SOW, as we call it. So when you lose a creek and then it seems to recover it and it doesn't hold it again, that to me is like the 1-2 punch. So I'm going to show you where I'm looking at. I'm looking at this area on October 29th where the price drove up to that resistance, and then it dropped here, and then it came back up to distribute again. And notice that like after that, you know, the rest is kind of self-explanatory. You can see it breaks down again at 43 cents, and then it continues down to the low area here at 38 cents, which is, again, been a pretty common support region. I've got this purple line drawn. It does seem like it's bleeding beneath that quite a bit. Like, sellers are really trying to push that down and push below that marker. So yeah, it's a weak line too. I don't really like the line because it's not holding it very well consistently. I'm trying to like make it as wide as I can. Look based on the top here where it breakout on October 16th, and then there's like 3 hits. This one doesn't actually quite make it there. Yeah, and that looks like it's pushing through it again, and I think there's a gap zone kind of retracement level down here at 36 cents where this purple bar is on the chart. So instead of breaking out, it attempted to push the resistance and then it dropped. Now, we had come to the conclusion after much ado, where we went back and forth about some waveforms, we had come to the conclusion that the topmost, which I'm kind of messing with right now on the chart, this guy, that creek on the top of those parallels was probably the most critical breakout marker. And once you break that, if you break it, you should see a leg up. I'm going to go out on a limb now, and I'm going to talk about this potential move here back to the upside. So I created a little pink box, because when you get the drop down, that breakout probably is the same, right? It's a series of parallel movements. Usually it makes sense, again, in terms of a wave, to come back up to a particular level, and maybe that level has already been given to us with the middle point here. And I don't like the, I don't know, I don't really like that set up very well, but I think it's there. So yeah, I think I got it right. So I'm going to change this middle area to a yellow, and I'm going to consider that as a very likely spot that you come back to, which already was something we had talked about. The reason I'm doing that is because I think it's the midway point of that drop, and there's a gap zone there. So it makes sense to me that that would have been marked off. It was right before the split. So that's like the split value. And that's where they were in the middle of that drop. It's a little confusing for some reasons, but other reasons. So we missed a lot of the early wave opportunities that we had on here, but this would be like the last wave opportunity if it breaks out here. This would be like the big one. Or the best one, I would say. So if it doesn't break out very high, and I don't know when it's going to happen, but let's say it took off here on maybe Thursday or Friday this week. It does seem like you may only get back up to the 95 to like this area right here. That intersection's really good right there. 95 cent. And with possible extension, you know, potential extension up to this area. But I think that would just be like distribution if it does do that. And then my guess is it's going to sell back down to this level. Pretty low. So if it does go again, it probably won't be until late November. And that kind of follows. So you would travel sideways in this little gap zone around 60 cents. No, 81 cents down to 66 cents. Sure. So I'm not really worried that it didn't take off. I guess what I'm trying to say, like it's okay. Yeah, I mean, there's always a possibility of a breakdown. I get it. But to me, it reminds me a lot of the same stuff we always talk about. Like, there's a potential there for like a really nice wraparound. It depends on where it goes and how low. Yeah, I can see that. I think the first move is really just designed to get you back about 50 cents, and then we'll see what happens. It's just an SOS move. So it can come down all the way to the bottom, potentially, and then it's just a little SOS move back above. A creek jump, LPS, followed by an SOS. And that's there. Could be anywhere in here. I don't know. Do I think election results really matter that much for this stock? No, it's a Chinese stock. No, I take that back. It does very much matter because they both have very different views on tariffs, which would affect Chinese commerce. So our relationship with China. is going to be really impacted trade-wise by whoever's elected. So the tariffs are really significant. They're different for each candidate. So I take it back. It does affect their ability to trade with the U.S. But I think this company was predominantly a third world emerging economies type deal. So they wouldn't be, I don't know, I don't feel like there would be that much of a connection between the two. Yeah, I don't think there'd be that much of a connection, but there could be, I guess, just because. So maybe this is like a pivot, and it comes up here and then it rejects, and then it comes back down and back to the upside, and it goes one more time going into end of the year. It probably comes back down again. This is what a lot of my charts start to look like, is there's maybe a rally into early December, and then I don't see much else. I mean, there's potential always for everything to happen, but perhaps. So this would work fairly well if this is the way it worked out. I keep moving it over, and it's like, it frustrates me too, because I'm like, well, I want it to run, sure, but it is what it is. I can't make it run, Just looking at the way it's set up, the bounce, it looks pretty solid to me. This motion, I like this motion because, again, like, I get that, maybe that, oh, it's just someone's coming up and selling off, they're going to drop it again. I like that it's narrowing, though. It widened and then narrowed. I like that it's kind of staying high. So I think it's very possible this is going to be the end move out. That it would look something like that. Now, I have it going really high. I don't think that's necessarily how quickly it moves. Don't think there's a lot I could say about that. Just in FYI, because there's plenty of opportunity. It's not necessarily going to be symmetrical at all. There's plenty of opportunity to kind of have shenanigans in November, or even before then, like maybe right after this. The SOS region, it could be quite arduous, and then it goes up later. I mean, there's things like that that you just don't really know for sure until it happens. So, make it simpler. There you go. But this does make sense to me. This would be like the logical course of action. One of the things that you can do after you do something like this, if you feel like, well, this is a little too speculative maybe, is then go back and just look at the walk down levels. Because like that's another thing that I always like to check. It's like, okay, I'm using all these crazy parallels. The waves make sense. 1, 2, 3, that makes sense. Like push up, push up, push up. But then, and like the trajectories all line into that as well. You guys can't see my mouse, but I'm looking at the waves, like on this push right here, this overall move, like down, up, down, up. So I did that so you could see it. But then if you go to the left side and you observe like where are these levels, that's always a really good way to kind of see if you're maybe right on point. If they triangulate pretty well, and you can see this one triangulates pretty well to what the breakout should be, then it typically makes more sense to me. Like that this would be pushing this resistance from back September 11th makes sense. Like that does make sense to me. That it would come back down and check the highs at like 65 or 66 cents, that does make sense to me. There was a operator or somebody that was given a debt for equity swap, I think at like 66 cents or something. So if they had pushed up, they might sell down. And then if it can build support again around 65 cents, it should make the remaining push back out. And that's a big if question. But then I think that's where you're looking at, this is a potential pivot back to the upside. maybe about as far as you would see it going. That is a little bit symmetrical. You know, it leads you back to the symmetry of this marker. I'm going to use this arrow to help draw it out, to draw the line. Right? So finding support across this secondary one makes sense. But I don't think it looks bad. 30-minute EMA, it's that blue line coming through here. It's sitting right now at 41 cents. Let's take a look at the hourly. The hourly right now is 45 cents, which would be near the kind of LPS region here. So that also works. And then let's go to 2 hour. Oh man, 2 hours actually up here. It's right there. It's on this level. So it would be hitting the 89 cent. So again, does it make sense? Yeah. About 4 hour. 4 hours way up top. It's still really, really low. Like it's at like 3, or really, really high. It's at like 390. So it's starting to look a lot more like the peak level here. But I have to keep in mind that that was before the split. I don't know if that matters long term yet. I would suggest that this big macro level that we're trying to get back to, which was this, we identified this trend a long time ago. I'm going to use this to kind of show you where that trend is coming down here. That's the big one, I think. I do believe that's the most important area that we're going to retest. I wouldn't be surprised if this 4 hour continues down, you know, until later on, way later on even. That this could be a continuation of like that 4 hour would make sense to me. And it may not ultimately breach that in any near point in the future. I mean, this could take a long time if it kept coming down. So my guess is that it doesn't reach the 4 hour just yet. I think it would be later. It's just too far away and I don't think you're going to hit it. But the 2 hours in the right spot, the 1 hour and the 30 minutes all make sense to me. So there's still a good potential here for a pretty large move on WTO going into late November. So silly. Arizona took almost 2 weeks last election. Remember that? Yeah. So that's what I was saying. Like they had a preliminary announcement about 4 days after, or it was like 2 to 4 days. I can't even remember. I think it was like 4 days after. But then there was a lot going on because of, that was a different time though. I really do think. Historically, elections have not taken that long to call. It was a crazy situation. The way you described it is pretty appropriate. But but a lot of it had to do with mail-in voting because of COVID and other stuff like that. So, yeah. You're not going to necessarily know right away. There's always going to be a couple delays. I told you guys I read an article about it at the beginning of the stream that it's not very consistent, really ever. Usually it's within a couple days, but like they had a preliminary winner last time, but at the end of the day, you're right, it took a really long time to it just does. I mean, things happen. So yeah, we've got you got to keep it a little bit neutral. I do anyways. I'm not going to tell you guys who I voted for or anything like that. I won't do that. Even if I did believe in one candidate over another, like, it's my opinion, it's my vote. And I think the same applies for you. You're more than welcome to share that, but I don't want this to turn into like a political forum. So it's not what it's about. Do I think it matters to the stock market? Yeah. Of course it does. That would be silly. Like, I don't think you could be in the stock market and not care about fiscal policy. That doesn't make any sense. But I do think there's a difference between like, hey, I believe it matters and we can talk about how it impacts the chart and how it might impact the results of certain price actions. We can do that without having like political debate. There's a difference there. One is very matter of fact, like this is historically how it works out. Another is very opinion and usually very volatile, unfortunately. Yeah. I think, and I'll tell you, man, like, I'm pretty sure my wife and we may not have voted the same on all the issues, but we were talking about it before we went to vote, and I was like, I just want you to know, and this is what I said to her. I said, I just want you to know, I understand why you want to vote the way you vote, and totally love you and respect you, and I have nothing but the utmost, care for you, and I don't believe that it will affect our relationship. And I just really value her opinion, and it's valid, just as valid as mine. And even if I disagree with certain things, and we disagree on some stuff, it's not about keeping it civil or anything like that. It's more just about actually caring about people. I think when you get on the internet, you find that you don't care about people, so you end up trashing the other side with argument. And argument's fine in certain forums. It's like good in certain places, right? Like in the court of law, argument is wonderful. In debate, argument is wonderful. But on the internet, argument tends to be pretty much just trash talk and devoid of human dignity. So I'm not a big fan. When I set out to do this thing with the Discord group, that was one of the things I was thinking about a lot, was like, what do I do in the event that there's debate that's gone down a path that's not healthy? So I just decided to make it ubiquitous, like, if that's the right word, that unanimous maybe is a better word, I don't know. That like if there was going to be it's very clear, like if you're gonna do that, that's not the place for you, because I just didn't want it to be like that. I want there to be an environment where you can have healthy debate, disagree about stock stuff, but then also have civility to it, and not ultimately like everything shouldn't devolve into horrible stuff, like death threats or something, It's just terrible. I haven't talked about MPW very much lately. You guys are like, yeah, you do. You talk about like every day, Booksy. Okay, so I do talk about it enough. But you guys are like, yes, you do. Yeah, see, I don't know. This is weird. It's almost like it went wider or something. I can't quite put my finger on why that's doing that. It just doesn't meet the bottom. It does seem to me that MPW might take a turn up to 615. I just want to say it again on stream because I haven't said it in a while. I talked about it a bit on Discord the other day. So there's a gap low right here around 380s, there's a little gap here that was never filled. It's not like 385. What's interesting about that gap at 385, and you won't have to see my cursor to see what I'm doing here, is that there's a snap to the wrong level. If you go down to the bottom to top and you look at the Fibonacci retracement, if you do a fib retracement pretty soon, you can get down to the 4s, and it's not quite low enough, but each time this has come down, man, it did it again? What? Yeah, it didn't quite check the level I wanted it to check. So there's two floors. One's here at 308, the other is here. And I was going to use the lower one, but I accidentally, I guess it snapped to the other one. So 292 or something like that, 293. That area, if you notice, definitely has the appearance that that's right where the gap is, where they left it open way back over here in February. So I don't have a lot of strong hope that this isn't going to just like maybe come back up here and then hook and then drop again. I hate that. I also don't see why you couldn't just have it drop here, hit that marker, and then go. But it just depends, you know? Like, we talk about the outlook on this quite a bit as a comparison model to the 2020 bottom. And that might have us be like more of a downside move after December going down, you know what I mean? And then not really taking off again until May or June. And that's very similar to what we see on AMC. This area here going down, not taking off until May or June. It seems possible, and it also seems possible that if this drops low and then just rebounds, you could just take off. I mean, realistically, could it do that? Yeah. You know, and I have thoughts about it, but I don't feel strongly about it anymore. Like, if it went down to the bottom, I could see it gap filling and then doing like a 50-50 up to 8, basically. So I think there's a possibility there. I have a feeling in my gut that if it goes up first, it may not matter either way, because maybe they're going to come back. Maybe they're going to come back anyways and get the gap after 8 or something like that. If it goes up to 8, great. Maybe they still have to come back down. That to me screams more like a distribution, like ultimately, but part of me wonders if it goes up now and it only hits 6. That's where I'm sort of like wondering, that could just be like a UTAD here after like a UTAD on this top region. So it's like a cat ear right after the first push, ear 1, middle, ear 2, and then ear 2 breaks down on this trend. And it does make sense to me. If you count this area in the center, this area right here in the center as like a weakness on this trend here, then it would make sense that this could be like a 50-50 layup from 450 all the way up to the gap. There's another gap here at 625, and then once you fill that gap at 625, you just spend some time in December chunking it sideways, making people think it's going to run, and then you drop it back down. And ultimately, like, that would be good. Like, it would be an effective way of getting it from here to redistribute and then drop it back down, and then start the way again walking backwards towards gaps and then pumps and then dumps, so on and so forth. So what I have on the chart right now is pretty much what I expect. This area right here, you guys can't see it, but the main path that you can visually see. The area that kind of has me the most curious would be this big pump. If it does drop first and you get like a nice little wick down to like 385 or something like that, I think it could have a really substantial move back to like 8. And I think that falls in line with some of the setup as a kind of a fake out for bears, in that it already sort of made that jump over this creek here, this wave, and if it comes back through and it just double tests it like a double bottom there almost would be just so perfect. And it's really like a quadruple bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you could just launch and really clean 50-50 up to 550, then to 8. It makes a lot of sense on a couple of levels, but then again, part of me is like, I don't know if, I know it seems a little odd because you're like, well, if it makes sense, then why are we just going to do that? I just don't know if that makes the most sense. Like, there's been some back and forth for me about MPW over the last several months. I've been really swinging with the price. It's not because it's low, it's because it broke this trend here, this low trend. And the fact that it went up high in September, where we thought AMC might rise, makes me wonder. I had originally counted it differently, though, if you recall, until it pushed up to the higher high. I thought this was going to be like a wave here. This is the cross, and then this is a wave here, which would indicate that you're still missing this guy, like this upward move, which again would make sense to me to come back up again to hit this marker somewhere around the 7s or 8s. So I have this sort of problem, I guess, where I'm not showing a lot of consistency because I'm not really positive about the wave count anymore. I was feeling it for a little while. So I mean, I guess in theory, if it came low and pushed back up, it could just be that whole level. If it just took off, maybe it could get all the way to 730s, you know, if that wave is right. So it's just a lot of debate in my brain. I had looked at MPW every which way when I started doing the comparison to what we see on AMC, and it just, nothing about that AMC comparison led me to believe that it would run until at least May because of the timing. So that's the issue that I've been having, is like, it doesn't seem like it would run. If it's truly doing like a, and this is a auto reaction with a phase B top, you could have an LPS here and just take off, or you could have it break down and go low for a spring. And either one is totally valid. So there's an issue there of like, it hasn't made the appropriate move yet, which is not fun. Like, nobody wants to hear that. They want to know, okay, what's the definite outcome here? I don't know. It's that simple. I just don't know. Like, because it, once the phase B is done, if you find support, you just take off. Technically, this breakdown right here could just be a test of liquidity. And if it finds a support, it could just take off to the upside and go up to like the 730s. I would love it personally. I'd be making a lot of money, but the issue is that if they don't want to do that, there's just so many ways. If the operators want to take it lower again, and that breakdown here is kind of valid, and they just want to continue to walk it down, there's just so many ways to walk it down that I can't pinpoint a specific one. On the 4 hour, to me, it looks like, you know, again, this is sort of pointless in some ways, because it's like, well, it could just drop. But on the 4 hour, it just looks like, to me, it just, okay, hit a low. I mean, maybe if it recovers, it goes. But who knows? It's sitting pretty, like, it's definitely in a position where it hit oversold, and now it looks like it's trying to hold a support right now, which looks like, again, it could just take off back to the top. But there are times where we've done something similar and we've had kind of a dead cat bounce, if you will, on the RSI, and it just kind of comes right back to another low. And looking back here at like September 2023, so, you know, could it be something like that where it kind of bounces out and then heads back down? Yeah. This is why I've not kind of avoided, to some degree, I've kind of avoided MPW a little bit lately. Because like, that's not responsible. I think the best of it. I really do. I genuinely think that it's very possible this thing could be up at $7 or $8 come after elections. Like, I really do. But at the same time, you know, if this is maybe a question of who's elected. If Trump's elected, he's a real estate mogul. Maybe that bodes well for a lot of real estate REITs. Like, maybe they see that as a positive. Like, he's going to be pro real estate business. You know, well, that would make sense to me. Of course it would. Democrats, a lot of times they favor like more affordable housing, for example. Everybody should favor that, but it's just one of those ticket platform things where, and they, and this is a medical one too, so you tie in like medical belief. Obviously, a Trump victory seems to favor this REIT, I'm not gonna lie, for a number of reasons. Privatized healthcare being a big one, real estate being a big one. All of that kind of screams the Donald Trump ticket, at least from the helicopter view. So it may just depend on who wins. Yeah. But I have no long-term fears about it. Like, I still think that long-term, this is going to be pretty positive overall. I'm really not that worried. Short-term, I'm a lot more concerned, maybe about outcome, but. And then, yeah, they have earnings Thursday. It's before market opens, so it's kind of like sandwiched next to AMC. AMC's Wednesday after close. MPW is before market open, and then they're doing like a stream at like 10 a.m. on Thursday. It may have some pretty volatile action. Obviously, with MPW, the best case would be they just blow it out of the waters, but they've been like severely missing on EPS for a while, mostly because of the adjustments that were made due to their tenant issues. They had the. Let me just put it this way: like, earnings is not supposed to be hard to beat, so there's issues there. But at the same time, this has been like a drastically overblown, and I already mentioned this, like they lost 12 billion or something in their value, market cap value, but that whole like steward tenant problem really only cost them 2 billion. Now, is that a big amount of change? Yeah, but it wasn't $12 billion worth of value. It was way overblown. So like, there's issues with that, and then there's also the issues of like management being questioned, and there's all kinds of stuff. Basically, like, this is just one of those stocks that's had too much drama for its own good, and it may take some time to recover, but ultimately it's way undervalued in my opinion. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. This looks almost divergent now on the daily, doesn't it? If this can hold, RSI can hold high, and this hits like a low that's very similar, or even slightly below here, I think it could be just spring action. Yeah. You see that? I don't think it's going to go low enough. If it has to hold it and then break out, though. That's the thing. Divergences don't work if you don't break out. Meaning, like, if it doesn't actually form a bottom down here in the 430s, then there's no... The divergence on the RSI, which you can see on the bottom portion of the screen, it doesn't make any difference because it can just bleed out, and then it's not a true divergence. So you guys are like, oh my gosh. Is it really divergent, though, because it hasn't made a lower low yet? I mean, it's basically like flat. I mean, it came back to essentially the same values that it did on this dip on the 14th. And it came on the 14th, it came down to 443. Recently, it came to 446. It's more of like what they call like a mild divergence. It's almost like a double bottom, and the RSI on the first push was down at 31.45, and now it's at 40. So debatable, but it has to be pushed out. Regardless, you guys, like, it doesn't really matter. It has to break out. If it doesn't break out, it doesn't make any difference. So breakout levers for MPW are really at 5. So whether it makes the drop, which I'm personally fine with, if it does it on earnings, I think it'd be fine. I'd like to see it kind of bleed down and then just rally the crap back up to 5. I'd love that. But if it doesn't do that, then we'll look at it again. All right, let's finish it up. Long day. Short day, long day, both day. No cursor today, so I've been struggling with that. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that AMC looks particularly awesome right here, but I also don't think it looks particularly bad. And what I mean is that those are just mostly wicks on this bottom, on this 4 hour. To me, it's just like a compression and a consolidation at 435, which makes sense. That's the level that we'll probably chill at. I'd be more surprised if we dumped it or just ran away from it tomorrow. Like that, either one of those would be kind of surprising to me. I don't really want to pump up into earnings if we can avoid it. It's just not my favorite. I'd rather just either sit tight or go down a little bit into earnings. But we'll have to wait and see if it holds the current creeks and junk. Yeah, I don't know if it will matter that much. I feel like you can do it. You could probably keep it pinned flat tomorrow. Looking at these local little ranges and just seeing what I can see. I know it kind of messes up the chart, but I want to see it, so I'm going to look. Yeah, I believe this is like generating a semi-parallel kind of structure. Pretty close. So if I have to make a guess, see, I've got this too far over. If I have to make a guess, I would probably guess it doesn't move until earnings, and then we see a make or break Thursday morning, and then I would assume it's going to be like 444, which is the area I talked about. It makes sense to me that it would come back to there, but it's the way it's been positioned is sort of interesting. So we talk about waves, we talk about this would be like the low, the middle of the wave. It's a little odd, but there's just a simple principle about waves we've mentioned before, that you have like a push up and then a push down, and then potentially it pushes back up. What I'm finding here is that that could be indication of the bottom of the wave, like it already happened right there. So what this would be is like, this would be like the center mark, the potential center mark of the wave Tuesday morning here. So maybe it does come back up before earnings. Maybe we're chilling out up here Wednesday. Because like from a wave perspective, I wonder if it doesn't break out. I hadn't even considered that possibility. Great. I got another bunch of work to do. I didn't consider the possibility that it could just not break out. But now I'm sort of staring at this like, yeah, I mean, I guess it's possible. If the elections aren't announced and there's no movement overall, this could just like chill out underneath here, you know, for like 2 days and do nothing. That'd be the weirdest earnings, because usually there's some kind of big move, but there's some kind of a whip. Something happens like way up and down real fast. But I suppose it's possible. It could just chill. So we may actually get an early break and head up into earnings, and then yeah, we'll see what happens after that. And then it's at 444. Wasn't that the level you said I had to hit and take off from, Booksy? Yeah, that might be a good way to kind of keep everybody in suspense instead of doing it the other way. Because this would be more confirmation of something. This is like, this lower area is like, this is confirming nothing. Nothing. No confirmation. Bummer. Well, oh well. I'm not going to look at this short-term little bit right here. You know, I don't want to make assumptions yet. I'd be curious to see if it does one more little dip. That'd be the most interesting thing. Otherwise, I think it's probably just going to wave out, breaks back above like 440, and just kind of takes off. Sure. And that's the wave. It doesn't seem like the reaction would have to come higher than 452. So that makes me think it might stay below the... It's very even, is what I'm trying to say. It looks like it's measured out to be right at the same point that it dropped from. So that usually follows through, like right there. That's the intersection. And then there's two creeks that you'd have to check. One's here. That would be this breakout. This would have to check 444. Man, it'd be really cool if that 444 was right. That'd be a nice little one to get right. We remember when we looked at the thing and we said, oh, it's 444 or something like that. That'd be really neat. I'd be really happy to get that right. So if that holds, it stays there. I'm a little concerned about this lower one. And then I guess if it breaks, it comes down at some point, maybe it goes for that lower one. I mean, it could be anywhere by that point, so who knows. All right, I'm not going to do that because that would be later. We can wait a couple days. Sorry about the crappy stream today. I feel bad. I feel like I did not do what I wanted to do today exactly. Spent a lot of time talking about that AMC comparison. There's always a chance that nothing happens, you know, this week. We don't see something for a week or two, but like you're saying, controls guy. But I also feel like there's a definite catalyst, so we'll see. How quickly the election comes in may play into factor, but I don't. That's just sort of saying nothing. That's like saying it happens when it happens. That's the element, the lurking variable, if you will. That's the element that we don't have very much control over, and its timing is mystery. I mean, it could be really smooth. We could know who's president tonight. It could be ridiculous again and not know for a week. So yeah, I mean, I had some ideas that we might move up to the 6s to do an SOS and then get election results or something. That was a while back. So maybe there's some continuity there, like it happens that way. I don't believe that it has to do that. There's no reason it could do something else. So it's just an idea. That's where I get kind of stuck. It's just timing. You don't really know. So let's say you got an earnings beat. It does a little dippy thing and rockets, and then not even a quick dip, just enough to get you to check, and then goes. Sure, you could take a week or two to get up there, or even a couple days, and then just chill out up at the top. And that, maybe it makes the most sense for some, or go up to 5. Like, we're not going to commit to the move until both pieces of news are good. We'll just kind of absorb the buying for now, and I don't know. I would encourage you guys to watch StockFather's opinion about the price action, obviously being different than mine, is good. So, all right, I'm out. It's 3 o'clock. End of the day at 4:39 with a little tiny hammer candle on the 1 hour. wouldn't put too much into that just yet. Just kind of wait it out. And GME ended up right at 23. I'm not seeing it as like a breakout just yet. I'm a big fan of definitely moving above and finding support, and I don't see that as a definite. And I think 23.10 is more important than 23, so this did push it. You got to be careful with these kind of things, though. You don't want them to sell through again. You need to hold the support and get above that level and hold it. And I'm not seeing that holding, so I'm not comfortable calling it a breakout just yet. Don't think that's wise. It seems like a possible break, but yeah, this is what I had drawn out. Like, you could have a reaction move that comes back up and head fakes. This was like what I was thinking about down here, November 6th or so. And that's sort of what we're doing. Like, we bounced and we're heading back up. But the only situation where this goes forward is like this higher drawing that I did is it has to hold above. And we're not there yet, so good to have movement up, but got to have patience. All right, guys, take it easy. I will fix my problem with this whole streaming thing tomorrow, and we'll be in a better position. So we'll catch you on the flip side.